Ellen's heels clicked like gunshots across the hardwood as she made her little exit performance, shoulders back, chin high, the same way she used to parade down the halls of her firm when she'd just closed a deal. Except now the deal was walking out on 27 years of marriage with a laugh and a fresh coat of lipstick. Doug stood motionless in the kitchen, scotch in hand, the glass sweating against his palm, his expression unreadable. Listen, quick break. We set a goal to hit 10K subscribers. So tap subscribe if you're liking these wild stories of betrayal. Now let's get back to the madness. Don't cry about it. I'm off to meet a real man, she tossed over her shoulder, letting those last two words linger like perfume. A smirk crept across her lips, expecting the usual dance. A flare of anger, some pathetic, how could you, maybe even an attempt at guilt. That was her script. Instead, silence. Doug didn't even flinch. No cracks in his voice. No twitch in his eye. Just a slow, deliberate sip of scotch, like he was savoring the quiet before a symphony. He walked over to the entryway, placed a thick, ivory-colored envelope on the reclaimed oak console table they'd picked out together during better years, and said one thing quietly. You'll want to read that before dinner. She paused. Not dramatically, instinctively. Like a dog sensing something off in the wind. Her hand hovered on the doorknob, her eyes shifting from his face to the envelope. It was heavy, unlabeled, neat. What is this? She asked, fingers tightening around the door like she needed something to grip, something stable. Doug didn't answer, just gave a small nod toward the envelope, then turned his back to her and walked back into the kitchen like he'd just handed off a grocery list, not a live grenade. Ellen hesitated, caught between pride and curiosity. She snatched the envelope as if doing so faster would keep her in control. Like speed could soften whatever blow she half suspected it carried. Outside, her car engine came alive, but she didn't pull away immediately. She sat in the driver's seat, envelope in her lap, staring at it like it might bite. Doug watched from behind the blinds, calm, measured. He didn't need to scream, didn't need to cry, because this wasn't a reaction. It was an execution. 3 months ago, he'd found the receipts, not just metaphorical ones, literal ones. A hotel in Providence booked under a fake email she'd once used for a fitness retreat. Only this time, it wasn't yoga and smoothies. It was dinner, drinks, and an overnight stay with a man named Spencer. He recognized the name. The ex. The one she always swore was toxic, unstable, from another life. Apparently, the toxin had aged well. He didn't confront her then. Didn't even give her the satisfaction of suspicion. Instead, he began collecting. Quietly. Systematically. He didn't snoop. He audited. Every lie became a ledger entry. Every gaslight, a receipt. Her favorite wine? He remembered. Her skincare subscription? Forwarded to his lawyer. Every Target run that ended with a perfume she never wore around him? Noted. Patterns. Dates. GPS. She didn't even realize the Range Rover's infotainment system logged travel histories. Doug did, because he installed it. Tonight was not the start of her betrayal, it was the reveal of his patience. As her taillights disappeared down the street, Doug finally exhaled. Not relief. Not sadness. Precision. The way a man feels when he knows the blueprints are finally in motion. The scotch glass clicked against the sink. The ice melted fast, just like her narrative was about to. She ripped the envelope open with the same arrogance she used to rip Doug apart in therapy sessions, always calling him emotionally unavailable and obsessed with control. What she found inside didn't just make her pause, it hollowed her out in one cold breath. Photos. Not old Polaroids. Not digital prints from some amateur PI. No, these were high-resolution color prints from a Nikon Z9, time-stamped, location-tagged, and cropped with surgical precision. The first photo showed Spencer, her real man, shirtless on a balcony in Key West. Arms around a blonde. Not Ellen. Younger. Slim. Wearing Ellen's sunglasses. Second photo. Dinner in Chicago. A brunette this time. Same man. Same hand placement on the thigh. Different lie. Third photo. Not even a photo. A screenshot. A text conversation. Spencer, you don't snore like the other one. She's like a chainsaw in heels. Unknown number. LOL, you're such an A. She really think you're serious. Spencer, she's my travel budget. Chill. Ellen blinked hard, her face twisting as the weight of the betrayal shifted. Her first instinct was denial. He must have photoshopped this. But she recognized Spencer's apartment balcony. The one he said he moved out of months ago. The Chicago steakhouse? The one she personally made the reservation for because he didn't want to screw it up again. She clutched the photos like they were burning her skin. Her eyes scanned every timestamp, every grain of evidence she didn't want but now couldn't unsee. He'd been cheating on her the whole time. Not behind her back. On her dime. Flights? She paid. Hotels? Her card. The AirPods she gifted him? In one photo, they were on the brunette's nightstand. Then she saw it, at the bottom of the envelope, a single folded note. Neatly typed. Black ink on thick ivory cardstock. Doug's touch all over it. Make sure he orders you dessert. You'll be paying for it. No signature. No flourish. Just brutal elegance. Ellen's jaw clenched so hard she thought she heard something crack. And then came the panic. Because Doug hadn't just stumbled into this. He knew. Not just about her and Spencer, but about Spencer's other women. Doug had known for months and waited. The glove box suddenly felt too small. The air too thick. Her car smelled like Doug's cologne from earlier that day, and now it felt mocking. She slammed the photos back into the envelope like she could undo it all by hiding the evidence again. She started the car and floored it out of the driveway like she could outrun the shame. But shame has a way of sticking to leather seats. Especially the kind you bought with your soon-to-be ex-husband's passive-aggressive housewarming gift money. By the time she got to Spencer's apartment, she didn't knock. She barged in. He was shirtless. Not alone. Another woman. New. Redhead. Oh, I thought you said. Ellen didn't say a word. Just stared. Not at the girl. Not at Spencer. At the vase. Her vase. From her own dining room. On his dresser. She turned around without a word. Not because she had grace, but because something was starting to claw at the edge of her mind now. Doug wanted her to find this. He didn't just let her walk into hell. He paved the road and lit it. The door creaked as she walked into the house, still dressed in yesterday's humiliation. Her makeup had smeared sometime around 2 a.m., maybe after she realized the redhead had been using her toothbrush. She hadn't cried. Not because she didn't want to, but because there was something worse than sadness crawling up her spine. She was being outplayed. Badly. The air in the house was sterile. Too quiet. No coffee brewing. No NPR playing faintly in the background. Doug always started the day with classical radio or some podcast about brutalist architecture. Today? Nothing. It felt like stepping into a model home, staged but uninhabited. Her heels echoed through the kitchen. And there it was. A single piece of paper centered on the granite island. Doug's handwriting. Elegant, sharp, precise. If you're looking for your charger, it's with your second phone, and your backup Gmail, and your hotel rewards account. I forwarded everything to my attorney. No, dear Ellen. No, regards. Just that cold, clinical dissection of her secret life laid bare in 3 lines. She stood frozen for a full minute, then lunged for her purse. No phone. Not her real one, of course, that was in her hand. Her other one. The one with no contact named Doug. The one that only buzzed when she was at Pilates or visiting her sister. She bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping on the second step. Bedroom. Closet. Half empty. Doug's suits had gone. The ones she used to complain were too conservative. The shirts she never ironed. The cufflinks she mocked as architect cosplay. All gone. His drawers? Empty. Not hastily ransacked, strategically cleared. Her mouth went dry. She opened the safe behind the mirror. Empty. Even the petty cash stash she didn't think he knew about gone. Back downstairs. She flung open the desk drawers in the home office. Her old laptop was gone. Her backup drives? Missing. She yanked open the file cabinet. The joint assets folder was there, but light. Thin. She opened it. Only a post-it. Not joint. Check the prenup. She stared at it like it was in a foreign language. She had a prenup? Yes, she signed something. 27 years ago. She was too in love back then. Doug had said, standard stuff. And she, tipsy off Prosecco and naivete, had said something idiotic like, I'd sign a napkin if it made you happy. She'd spent the last decade treating him like a well-dressed ghost, someone she barely noticed unless the roof leaked or the gardener quit. But apparently, the ghost had receipts. Her mind raced. If he knew about the second phone, the backup Gmail, the hotel rewards account, that meant he'd seen the itineraries, the notes, The flirty confirmations. The thank you for last night, winky face, messages from Spencer, from Derek, even from that weird dental consultant she met at a trade show and swore didn't count because it was out of state. Doug knew everything. And worse? He'd been watching her fall into her own trap in real time. Not stopping her. Not confronting her. Just documenting. She opened her laptop, her real one, and tried logging into their joint bank account. Access denied. She tried their shared Dropbox. Password changed. She opened her own Gmail. Two-step verification triggered. To a phone number she didn't recognize. Doug's number. Her stomach dropped. She lived in his house on his dime, on borrowed time. And now? Now she couldn't even access the digital trail she'd been using to cheat. Because someone else had it already. And he wasn't just deleting her access. He was owning the narrative. She was still pacing the kitchen in bare feet, biting her thumbnail until it bled when the doorbell rang. Not once. 3 firm chimes. Her stomach clenched. It couldn't be Doug. Not after this morning's tactical ghosting. Maybe Spencer had realized how badly he'd messed up and was coming to grovel like he used to after their breaks. Maybe. She opened the door. Mom. There stood her mother, Lorraine, in her usual powder blue pantsuit like she'd just come from a HOA meeting, clutching a sealed manila envelope with both hands like it was radioactive. Her expression was neutral but off, like she knew something and wasn't sure how to say it. He asked me to give you this, Lorraine said. Douglas. Dropped it off himself. Said it was important. Ellen blinked. Took the envelope slowly, as if something might jump out. He looked calm, her mother added carefully. Like, very calm. Ellen didn't respond. She stepped back into the house, letting the door swing shut behind her without another word. She walked like her body was on autopilot, like her feet didn't belong to her. Sat at the kitchen island and peeled the seal open. Her pulse thumped in her ears. Inside were 2 crisp legal documents. The first had all the warmth of an obituary, formally typed, letterhead, notarized. Notice of termination of residential tenancy. Issued by the Cronmore Family Trust. She skimmed. I was jumping past the legalese. What jumped out? Her name. Not listed as co-owner. Not as co-signer. Not as tenant. She was a guest. The house she lived in for 18 years. The one where she raised a daughter, hung ornaments every December, hosted 4th of July barbecues, and remodeled the kitchen twice, never belonged to her. Technically, legally, she had no more right to that property than the pool cleaner. The deed? Held by the trust. Doug's trust. Which she never paid attention to. Because why would she? He was the boring money guy in the marriage. He handled the taxes, the estate lawyer, the investments. She handled what? Social events. Spa calendars. Coordinating Rachel's school fundraisers. The letter gave her 30 days. No negotiation. No loopholes. It was already filed with the county. Copies had been sent to her, to Doug's attorney, to the trust manager. That trust? Formed 6 years before they even married. Which meant this was never our house. It was always his trap. The second page was a copy of the trust deed. Her signature as a witness. Dated. Filed. She'd signed it. Of course she had. Doug had said something harmless like, "We're rolling over the property for tax reasons." It's a formality. And she'd been too busy planning a spa weekend in Scottsdale to ask questions. She stared at the paper in front of her like it was written in fire. Her hands started trembling. From the living room, her mother's voice floated in, tentative. Ellen, sweetie, what is that? Ellen opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Only air. Lorraine stepped closer, concern morphing into discomfort. She scanned the page and went pale. Oh. Ellen. Silence stretched between them. Dense. Suffocating. I thought you were the smart one, Lorraine muttered under her breath. At least smarter than I was. Ellen looked up, blood draining from her face. It wasn't just her marriage that was gone. It was the illusion she'd ever been in control. Doug had planned this, not just for weeks. Not for months. Years. And now the walls she called a home were just drywall and deception. She wore the navy dress Doug once said made her look like a Manhattan senator's mistress. Back then, he'd said it with a wink. Tonight, it felt like armor. She picked their favorite spot, Lucio's, intimate, candlelit, The kind of place with white tablecloths and waiters who pretend not to notice arguments across the veal parm. It was where they used to celebrate anniversaries, Rachel's early college acceptances, even Doug's semi-retirement party 5 years ago when she still used the word we in public. It felt symbolic, familiar, a battlefield she thought she still had a map for. She messaged him 2 hours earlier. Let's talk like adults. No drama. Just dinner. To her surprise, he replied. Sure. 7 p.m. Lucios. Booth 4. A quick, simple reply. No emojis. No sarcasm. Not even a period at the end. Which, somehow made it worse. She got there at 6:45. Doug was always early. That used to annoy her. She wanted to beat him for once. She ordered the Pinot. Not because she wanted it. She just needed her hands busy. Kept checking the door every time it opened. A couple walked in. Then a man in a gray coat. Not Doug. Not even close. Her knee bounced under the table like a metronome tracking regret. By 7:10, she was starting to sweat beneath the linen. She dabbed her neck with the napkin. By 7:20, she ordered bruschetta she didn't touch. By 7:35, her wine glass was empty, and she was considering ordering a second just to look occupied. At 7:43, a waiter approached with a folded card on a silver tray. She didn't recognize him. You're Mrs. Cronmore? She blinked, startled. I'm Ellen. He nodded, placed the envelope on the table gently, then vanished as if trained in ghost exits. It wasn't sealed. It didn't need to be. Inside, a single line printed on heavy cream stationery. Doug's stationery. The kind she used to roll her eyes at when he insisted on ordering it in bulk. Thank you for confirming this dinner reservation. It validated the alimony clause breach. That was it. No signature. No date. Just that one devastating sentence. Ellen's fingers went cold. She stared at the paper as if it would self-destruct. She flipped it over. Blank. Her heart began pounding. Because she remembered now. The prenup. The one she never read. The one Doug's lawyer assured her was mostly ceremonial. There was an alimony clause. One tied specifically to, what was it? A breach of exclusivity? No, wait. Consummation of extramarital involvement with financial dependency still established. That was the phrase. Doug had underlined it during the final draft. She'd laughed. That sounds like a Roman law. Who talks like that? Apparently, Doug did. And by confirming this dinner, after the photographic evidence, after the nights, she let Spencer pick up the check using Doug's money. She'd handed Doug not just emotional closure. She handed him legal ammunition. Her jaw clenched as she scanned the restaurant. Certain someone, anyone, was watching, enjoying her collapse like a Netflix original. But no one looked her way. Because Doug wasn't there. He never planned to be. He just needed her to show up. To confirm everything. She folded the card back into its envelope like a woman cleaning up her own crime scene. Slowly, mechanically, the bruschetta sat there, untouched. And suddenly, Ellen understood. She hadn't just lost her husband. She'd lost her leverage. And Doug? He hadn't come to talk. He came to win. By not showing up at all. By Saturday afternoon, the silence had become unbearable. Not the silence of Doug. His absence was surgical, expected now, like a limb you no longer feel after weeks of phantom pain. No, this was social silence, a void that pressed in from all sides. Texts unread. Messages left undelivered. Instagram like suddenly gone. WhatsApp group chat quiet for the first time since 2019. But one silence cut deeper than the rest. Marie, her best friend of 23 years. Maid of honor. Godmother to Rachel. Wine night partner, secret keeper, and therapist without the copay. Ellen had left 4 voicemails and 2 texts. Nothing. So she drove. No call ahead, no heads up. Just keys, sunglasses, and an urgent need to hear someone say, "This isn't that bad." Marie's neighborhood hadn't changed. Same manicured lawns, same rusting swing set in the corner of her yard they always said they'd fix. But as Ellen pulled up, something shifted in her gut. Marie's car was in the driveway. So was Alan's. Lights were on. Curtains open. A candle flickered on the dining room table. They were home. And avoiding her. Ellen knocked. No answer. She rang the bell. Footsteps. The blinds twitched. Then the door creaked open. But it wasn't Marie. It was Alan. Still in his polo shirt from golf. Jaw tight. hand gripping the edge of the door like he needed it for balance. He didn't move to open it wider. Didn't smile. Didn't even pretend to be surprised. Ellen offered a weak smile. "Hey, is Marie home? Alan didn't blink. Didn't look behind him. "She doesn't want to talk." The words hit her harder than they should have. They weren't angry. They were final. Ellen's voice cracked despite her effort. "Is this because of Doug? Because whatever he told you?" Alan's eyes narrowed. Not in confusion. In judgment. "Doug told us everything." Ellen froze. "What does that even mean?" she asked, already hating the tremble in her voice. Alan exhaled. "You played a long game. I'll give you that. We all thought Doug was lucky. A little stiff, sure, but solid. Faithful. Devoted. You know how many guys envied him? Built a career. Paid for your mother's care. Never complained about your little solo retreats to Sedona." Ellen opened her mouth, but Alan raised a hand. "I don't care about your version. Because the one Doug laid out? With timestamps. Screenshots. Hotel invoices sent from your email? That version's airtight." Silence. Then, click. He shut the door. No slam. No drama. Just rejection, quiet and cold. Ellen stood there on the porch like someone who missed the last lifeboat. She glanced back at the car. For the first time, she noticed the 2 empty wine bottles in the recycling bin by the garage, her favorite label. She and Marie used to drink it while watching terrible reality shows and mocking their husband's music taste. Now Marie was drinking it without her. Probably while watching her own marriage dissolve in real time and thanking God it wasn't hers. Ellen got back into her car. The engine purred. But she didn't drive. Just stared ahead, gripping the wheel. It wasn't just that Marie had ghosted her. It was the unspoken shift. People were choosing sides, and they weren't choosing hers. Sunday morning brought no clarity, just a hollow sense of losing momentum, like a swimmer realizing too late they've been paddling in circles. Ellen had barely touched her coffee. It was bitter, overbrewed, and tasted exactly like the anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in her chest. She sat down at the kitchen table, his kitchen table, apparently, with a mission: regain control. Step 1, the bank. She opened the laptop, typed the familiar joint account credentials. It had been their go-to login for years. Same password, same 2-factor sent to Doug's phone, which he'd always casually passed over to her. Access denied. She blinked. Tried again. Same result. A red banner appeared at the top of the screen. Account access restricted. Please contact your branch manager. She clicked over to his email account, douglas.cronmore@arcanet.org. Email not found. What? She checked the spelling. Again. Still nothing. As if the address never existed. So she pivoted to her own machine, her trusty MacBook, where she could at least review what was left of her correspondence. It wouldn't let her in. Admin access required. Her laptop was now asking her for a password she didn't know. She tried the usual ones: birthdays, pet names, old address, zip codes. Nothing. Then she noticed the user profile name had changed. Primary admin, Douglas C. Her blood went cold. She picked up her phone, dialed Rachel. Voicemail. She called Apple support. 25 minutes on hold. Only to be told that without the admin password, she was essentially shut out. Doug hadn't just changed locks. He'd walled off the entire digital ecosystem. And still, she wasn't done. She opened a new tab and logged into her own 401k portal. A small comfort. That at least was hers. Independent. Opened before the marriage. Password still worked. Good. She clicked to view her profile, letting out the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Then froze. Beneficiary, Hannah Cronmore. She stared at the name. Doug's niece. 24 years old. Interior design major. Used to braid Rachel's hair and call Ellen Aunt Ellie like some saccharine TV niece. Now, listed as the sole beneficiary. Ellen scrolled, eyes darting. No secondary. No contingent. Just one name. With a modification date, 3 weeks ago. Her fingers trembled on the trackpad. She refreshed the page, hoping it was some sort of glitch. It wasn't. Doug hadn't just cut her off from their finances. He'd redirected hers. Sure, she could contest it. Take it to court. Maybe even win. But it would be messy. Public. Ugly. And Doug had the paper trail, the receipts, the infidelity records, the prenup she never read. He hadn't touched her retirement fund yet, but he'd locked it in a vault made of pure humiliation and handed the keys to someone with better manners. She tried to breathe, failed. For the first time, she felt not just trapped, but irrelevant. Her name was being edited out. Doug wasn't just erasing their marriage. He was erasing her. The call came Monday morning. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the closet, half hers, half a ghost town, wearing the same sweats she'd worn for 2 days straight. Hair tied up in defeat, mascara still smeared under her eyes like bruises she'd earned emotionally. Unknown number. She answered before the second ring. Ellen Cronmore, the voice asked, clipped, sterile. Yes, speaking. This is William Brenner, your attorney. She sat upright, fast. Finally. I've been calling, texting. What the hell's going on? A pause. A breath on the other end. Ellen, he began. Not Mrs. Cronmore. Not ma'am. That alone made her stomach clench. I've gone through everything you sent me. The trust deed. The property files. The prenup. The credit activity. And, she interrupted, desperate to find even a sliver of leverage. Another pause. Longer this time. There's not much I can do, he said, bluntly. You were never legally added to anything. She blinked. What do you mean? I mean your name's not on the deed. Not on the trust. You have no legal claim to the house, the land, the vehicle titles, the savings accounts. Okay, but what about community property? She snapped, her voice climbing an octave. We've been married 27 years. That helps, but not the way you think. This isn't California. And you signed a prenup. No, she said immediately. That was just, I don't know, ceremonial. I have a scanned copy of the document here. Notarized. Filed with the state. Dated 2 weeks before your wedding. Your signature is clear. Ellen went quiet. Brenner's tone hardened. You signed away rights to all premarital assets and all derivative growth unless explicitly added by the other party. Derivative what? Investments. Retirement portfolios. The trust. Anything that grew from the base assets he brought into the marriage. She could barely breathe. He continued. In fact, it seems he intentionally allowed you full discretionary spending, but never legally connected you to any asset. You were a guest in the house. A cohabitant. But not a co-owner. Not a beneficiary. He paid for everything, she muttered, like a defense. And he never stopped, Brenner confirmed. Spa weekends. Solo trips. Cosmetic procedures. He even covered your mother's nursing care. So what, she snapped. Is that supposed to be noble? Generous? I'm not here to judge. But you asked what I could do. And I'm telling you, I have nothing to work with. No leverage. No shared ownership. No documented abuse. And now, thanks to the evidence he compiled, he may have grounds to terminate even the spousal support clause. Ellen's mouth went dry. That's not possible. I wouldn't have believed it either, he said, and for the first time, his voice carried something new. Pity. He played the long game, Brenner muttered. Most of these guys panic. They lash out. He didn't. He waited, and built a file that makes you look like a liability. Silence. The weight of it pressed against her ribs. She wanted to scream, to threaten, to fire him, but something in his tone, cold, detached, resigned, stopped her. He didn't even end the call with "we'll talk soon." Just a quiet "good luck." And a click. She was alone again. Only this time, it wasn't emotional. It was legal. Doug hadn't just prepared for the breakup. He architected an escape hatch lined in iron contracts, prepaid logistics, and a meticulous exit plan designed to collapse everything just after she stopped noticing the walls. He had never stopped paying. He just made sure none of it was hers. Ellen picked the bistro downtown. Not fancy, not loud, just neutral. Somewhere with enough lighting to feel safe, but dim enough to soften expressions. She'd made the reservation under Cronmore. The last name still felt like hers, even if the universe now treated it like a rental she'd damaged beyond repair. Rachel arrived 10 minutes late, wearing the beige sweater Doug gave her last Christmas. Hair up, eyes tired. The hug was quick. One-armed. Obligatory. They sat across from each other, menus untouched between them like a barrier neither of them wanted to admit existed. Thanks for coming, Ellen said. Rachel nodded, but her face didn't move. I know it's been weird. Another nod. Still no real eye contact. Ellen forced a smile. Listen, I want to clear some things up. About your dad. And everything. Rachel finally looked at her, but there was a wall in her eyes. Not anger. Not sadness. Just distance. Ellen leaned in slightly. He's not the man you think he is. He's always been controlling. Cold. You know that. Rachel's expression didn't change. I'm not making excuses, Ellen added quickly. But your dad has a way of twisting things. Making himself look like the martyr. I needed to breathe. I was lonely. Rachel's fingers played with the edge of her napkin, folding it methodically. A tic from childhood. Ellen remembered it vividly. Whenever Rachel felt cornered. You felt lonely, Rachel said quietly. So you cheated? I didn't cheat. Ellen snapped, too fast. Rachel raised a hand. Calm. Flat. I'm not here to argue the semantics, Mom. Silence. Then Ellen tried a different angle. I just didn't expect him to weaponize everything. He always said the money didn't matter. And now he's acting like I was some kind of leech, like I contributed nothing to this family. You didn't read the prenup, Rachel said softly, not accusatory, just stating a fact. Ellen's lips parted, then closed. I know what he told you, she said, tone tightening. Rachel leaned back in her chair, appraising her mother now like a stranger at an open house. No, Mom. He didn't tell me. He showed me. He showed me everything. Emails. Account logs. Photos. His lawyer. Hell, his estate manager laid out the timeline like it was a corporate audit. Ellen blinked, stunned. And you believed it? She asked, quieter now. All of it. Rachel didn't answer right away. She just stared, like she was trying to find the version of her mother she remembered from age 8 or 12, before things turned icy. Before she started learning not from what her parents said, but what they did. What did you think he'd do? Rachel finally asked. Just sit there while you threw him away? Ellen's jaw clenched. I didn't throw him away. Things just drifted. No, you drifted. He adapted. Rachel pushed back her chair. The screech of wood against tile was louder than it needed to be. Wait, Ellen said, almost a whisper. Rachel stood, paused, then leaned forward across the table. Dad told me to tell you something. Ellen leaned in reflexively, clinging to hope. Rachel's voice dropped to a razor-thin whisper. The house, the life, the stability, none of it was ever yours. Ellen stared, frozen. Rachel straightened, grabbed her purse, and walked away without a backward glance. And for the first time in weeks, Ellen felt something that had been kept at bay through panic, denial, and deflection. Not rage, not humiliation, something worse, irrelevance. Because even her daughter, her own blood, was no longer hers to lose. Doug hadn't just dismantled her world. He'd replaced her seat at the table. The truck pulled up just after sunrise, white cab, no company logo, the kind you'd assume was delivering furniture to a vacation rental. The men moved with silent efficiency. No questions. No confusion. They didn't ring the bell. Just walked right past Ellen, who stood barefoot on the porch in a robe that felt increasingly like a costume. Ma'am, one of them asked, glancing at her briefly, politely. We're here for Mr. Cronmore. She wanted to laugh, or spit, or say, there's no Mr. Cronmore here anymore. But she didn't, because she'd already seen the order. It was taped to a clipboard she caught a glimpse of when they passed, the address, the name, the inventory list. Doug's handwriting at the bottom. Precise. Calm. Final. She stepped aside. They packed his belongings with care. Not rushed. Not hurried. Every item boxed and labeled in the same exacting manner Doug had always lived by. His office? Done in under 30 minutes. The den? Empty by 8:45. By 9:15, the movers were walking down the hall with the antique drafting desk she always mocked as pointless, but now couldn't look at without her stomach turning. Then she heard Rachel's voice. Laughter. Coming from the driveway. Ellen leaned out the window. There she was, wearing sunglasses, duffel bag over her shoulder, coffee in hand. She stood next to Doug's SUV, chatting with the driver. Doug came out a minute later, wheeling a second suitcase. She smiled up at him like he'd just picked her up from college, not a crater of a family implosion. They didn't glance toward the house. Not once. At 10:02, Doug stepped back inside for the last time. Ellen was in the kitchen. She didn't speak. Neither did he. He reached into his satchel and placed something on the counter. Deliberate. Slow. A photo. A glossy 4x6. Thick paper. High resolution. Her. And Spencer. Taken from a distance, maybe a rooftop, maybe a drone. Her arms around his neck. His hands far too familiar on her waist. The same red dress. The same lipstick. Her head tilted back mid-laugh like she was on top of the world. There was a timestamp in the corner. She knew the date. Because it was the night she walked out of this house and told the man who built it that she was off to meet a real man. Doug didn't say a word. He just flipped the photo over, revealing a single line in pen. The night you laughed. Underneath it, his signature. Not scrawled. Not angry. Just elegant. Almost affectionate. Then he walked out the door, quiet as ever. No slammed doors. No parting shots. Just strategy. Execution. Precision. Ellen stared at the photo. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. She barely made it to the nearest chair before her legs gave out. The silence in the house wrapped around her like a closing casket. Because now, she finally understood. Doug hadn't raised his voice. Hadn't begged. Hadn't broken. He'd waited. Watched. Built. And then, when every piece was in place, he'd ended the game with a single, measured move. Checkmate. Not with fury, but with finality. She held the knife like she was hosting a late-night talk show, the patio lights bouncing off her champagne glass as if the spotlight wasn't enough. To Greg, she said, voice dripping with sarcasm, my dear husband, who once told me I was dreaming too big. She turned, full theatrical pause, her heels clicking as she faced her guests. Here's your cake, loser. And they laughed. The VP of marketing nearly choked on his spritzer. Some guy from sales slapped the table. Even her assistant, that nervous one who kept calling her boss lady, let out an awkward giggle and immediately looked at Greg like a kid caught breaking a vase. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just blinked slowly and glanced across the patio to where his parents were sitting, legs crossed neatly, both of them holding little dessert plates with untouched cake. His father's hand trembled slightly, not from the words, but from the Parkinson's. His mother, bless her, looked like she'd been kicked in the chest and was trying to decide whether to vomit or cry. And Dana, she just kept grinning like she'd landed the punchline of the decade. Greg looked back at her. Tall, sharp dress, diamond studs that didn't exist before the last business trip. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if noting the time of death of something he hadn't realized had flatlined months ago. He didn't say a word. He just turned toward the grill, flipped the burner off, and covered the ribs, because God forbid the sauce dry out. Someone came over to pat him on the shoulder. He didn't look up to see who. It didn't matter. Whoever it was had already laughed. It was supposed to be Dana's night. Her idea. Her homecoming from the glass ceiling, she called it. She'd insisted they hosted at their place, so my team sees I can be fun too, she'd said, handing Greg a to-do list like a corporate mandate. And he did it. Cleaned the deck. Set up the extra seating. Built a Spotify playlist labeled Dana's Big Night, with songs she used to dance to back when they still did things like that together. He even bought the cake. Red velvet. Her favorite. Gold lettering. Congratulations, Dana. She had scraped it off with a fork before the guest arrived. Said it looked too desperate. Then replaced it with that now immortal line written in black gel icing. He hadn't even noticed the switch until she cut it in front of everyone. You knew I was joking, right? She whispered to him later, when the crowd thinned and the music dulled. But he just gave her that same nod. The one that had carried him through 32 years of drafting failures, supplier drama, and boardroom layoffs. Not agreement. Not forgiveness. Just noted. What she didn't know, what no one did, was that Greg had already started seeing her clearly weeks ago. She thought he was invisible in that room. That he was just a prop in her power-fueled narrative. But the real show had already begun. And tonight, Dana forgot something very important. She forgot that even ghosts can watch. It started with the toothbrush. A second one. Blue. Slightly curved handle. Not his. Tucked behind the mouthwash like it belonged there. Greg had stood in front of the mirror that morning, toothbrush halfway to his mouth, staring at it like it was a hallucination. Dana had always been meticulous about her stuff, color-coded, compartmentalized, obsessive. She didn't just buy a new one, without tossing the old. And she sure as hell didn't forget which color was hers. He didn't say anything. That was Greg's specialty, not saying anything. It bought him time, gave him space to observe. And lately, there was a lot to observe. Late nights were chalked up to client demands. Locked screens to compliance protocols. She even blamed the new security policy when he couldn't access their shared tablet anymore. It's the IT department. They locked it up weird, she'd said, as not quite meeting his. Her face tight, like a too smooth surface stretched over something seething underneath. And then came Mick. Mick from legal. He was in every damn story. Mick thinks I should speak at the next conference. Mick says my analysis saved the Simmons account. Mick said he's never seen anyone lead a team like I do. Greg started referring to him in his head as Mick the Apostle, the way Dana recited his praise like scripture. So Greg did what Dana never expected. He logged in. Not to her current devices, she was too careful now. But the old ones? The ones gathering dust in the spare room drawer? Yeah, those still whispered secrets if you knew how to listen. Cloud backups were still syncing to her old iPad. And when he opened the Photos app, what he saw knocked the breath clean out of him, but didn't break him. Not right away. She was in a black one-piece, drink in hand, on a balcony somewhere sunny. Greg could tell by the wallpaper it wasn't a business trip. She was with Mick. Arms draped around each other like a honeymoon cliché. He flipped through, each photo worse than the last. Then came the videos. Laughter. Dancing. Her voice, sweetened by alcohol, calling Mick baby. A clip of her riding his back in a pool, shrieking like a teenager. Another of her feeding him room service pancakes in bed, topless, the sheet slipping lower each time she leaned in. And the final one, the one Greg only watched once, was in grainy night vision. The phone must have been resting on a dresser. They were mid-act. Greg paused it halfway through. Not because it was unbearable, but because he'd seen everything he needed. He found the emails next. She hadn't logged out of her old Gmail. Not the one she gave clients, the private one. There were messages to Mick with subject lines like, still at work winking face, and he bought it again LOL. In one, she wrote, Greg thinks I'm pulling all-nighters to impress the partners. Pathetic. He actually made me a protein shake this morning. God. He's like, grateful I'm ignoring him. Greg read that one twice. Then again. Then he closed the laptop and stood very still for a long time. No yelling. No calling. No confrontation. Instead, he went to the garage, opened the safe, and pulled out his external drives. Copied everything, photos, videos, emails, calendar pings. Cataloged it by date. Labeled it Dana_ethics_evidence_001. Then he made 3 more copies. One for the safe, one in the glove box, and one with a friend who didn't ask questions. He didn't need revenge. Not yet. He needed patience. And proof. Because Dana didn't just cheat on her husband. She underestimated a man who'd made a 30-year career out of solving catastrophic system failures without ever raising his voice. While Dana floated from guest to guest with her Prosecco grin and over-rehearsed anecdotes about rising above mediocrity, Greg was in the laundry room, scanning documents between refilling the chip bowl and re-icing the champagne bucket. Not out of nerves. Out of routine. Precision was second nature to him. And tonight, every click, every page, every byte he moved into place was another brick in the quiet detonation he'd been constructing for weeks. The cake had been delivered that afternoon, triple-layered, buttercream-frosted hypocrisy. She insisted on writing her own message. Greg had watched her scratch out the original congratulations and squeeze on her little roast with the steadiness of someone who thought cruelty was charisma. But the joke, the one that made Mick from legal giggle into his gin and tonic, was just the ribbon on the real gift Greg had prepared. Behind a locked folder labeled Client Budgets Q4, on his encrypted USB drive was an evidence chain that would make most IT auditors weep with joy. Photos. Timestamped metadata. Cross-referenced travel receipts. Email headers showing corporate card misuse during the weekend. Dana claimed she was off-grid with women from the Women in Leadership cohort. A $427 charge from the hotel spa tagged as client meal. A poolside selfie where Mick's hand was very much not in a professional location. He'd spent the last 3 weeks compiling it all like a seasoned archivist. The receipts. The calendar entries. The Slack messages. Even a Teams call recording where Mick referred to Dana as babe, and she didn't correct him, even though her direct reports were on the call. But that wasn't the real masterpiece. That came in the form of a brown envelope, sealed and waiting in his briefcase upstairs. Inside was a full draft of their financial separation agreement, tailored, notarized, clean. No messy drama. No hysterics. Just line items, asset division, pension adjustments, and a modest note in the margin. This is not a divorce filing yet. He'd also submitted a tip, anonymous, of course, to the company's ethics hotline. It was short. Just a file upload in 2 lines. Senior manager engaged in an ongoing affair with a subordinate. Used corporate resources for personal travel. Proof attached. He scheduled the submission for 7:45 a.m. the next morning. That way, it would be in the inbox before the first executive meeting. He wasn't being vindictive. He was being thorough. While Dana was clinking glasses and pretending the patio string lights made her look more approachable, Greg was setting the final permissions on the backup folder he'd created, shared only with one other email. A friend in legal compliance. No subject line. No signature. Just a link and the words. If something happens to me, make sure this reaches HR. He didn't expect danger. Dana wasn't the violent type. But the humiliation she'd fed him over months, years, quietly escalating until she thought herself untouchable, wasn't going to end with a cake and a snide toast. It would end when the system she worshipped turned on her. She always thought Greg was boring. Steady. Predictable. She forgot that predictable people make excellent planners. And this wasn't just a plan. It was a quiet execution with frosting on top. The guests left just before midnight, still laughing, though by then it was less at Dana's wit and more from the stale wine and overcompensating awkwardness that clung to the last hour like cheap perfume. A few compliments about the house, a passing, "Your husband's such a good sport," and then tires on gravel. Silence, except for the hum of the fridge and the faint bass line of the playlist Greg forgot to turn off. Dana walked in from the patio like she'd just closed a billion-dollar merger, kicked off her heels by the door, unzipped her dress in the kitchen like the house owed her a round of applause. Her lipstick was smudged and her smile was still sharp. There was glitter in her hair, and Greg made a note to vacuum the rug in the morning before his mother saw it. He stood at the sink, rinsing wine glasses. Quiet. Efficient. Watching the red swirl down the drain felt oddly satisfying. She padded past him in a silk robe she hadn't worn in months, probably to remind him what he was losing or what Mick was currently enjoying. She paused at the foot of the stairs and tossed over her shoulder. "You took that well." He didn't turn, just set another glass upside down on the drying rack. Dana chuckled like they were in on the same joke. "You know I was joking, right?" Greg finally turned his head slightly. "Sure." Then back to rinsing. Just like that. No anger. No sarcasm. Just a flat note of indifference that clipped her ego like a loose wire. But she didn't notice. Not really. Because she wasn't listening. By the time he made it upstairs, she was in bed, sprawled diagonally like she always did when she thought she'd won something. He walked into the bathroom, brushed his teeth slowly, methodically, like he had all the time in the world. The blue toothbrush was still there, untouched. Another silent flag waving in her corner of the vanity. He didn't move it, just noted it. Again, when he walked into the bedroom, Dana looked up at him from her pillow. "It was a joke, Greg. You're not actually upset, are you?" He turned off the lamp, sat on the edge of the bed, then slid under the covers without facing her. The darkness closed in like an honest conversation no one wanted to start. She shifted beside him, then added with a small scoff, "God, you're so sensitive sometimes. That's part of the problem, you know?" Greg stared at the ceiling. He counted the slow, pulsing hum of the ceiling fan, an old habit from insomnia during deadlines years ago. Click, click, whir. The irony was that Dana had always framed him as the emotionally absent one. Distant, quiet, dull. But silence isn't the absence of emotion. It's the warehouse where you store it until it stops screaming and starts planning. And he had been planning. What she didn't understand, what she never understood, was that Greg's silence wasn't surrender. It was surveillance. Dana wasn't joking. She never was. Not when she mocked his job, or the way he dressed, or the fact that he still called his mother every Sunday. Not when she left her phone face down at dinner. Not when she forgot their anniversary because she was under so much pressure at work. And certainly not when she toasted him in front of her colleagues with that snide little eulogy of a marriage. That wasn't a joke. That was her confession, wrapped in frosting and arrogance. She thought he'd swallowed it like everything else. But Greg didn't swallow it. He recorded it. And in that moment, as she drifted off in the glow of her self-made spotlight, Greg stared at the ceiling and made a final, silent commitment. Tomorrow, she'd wake up thinking she'd won. And by the end of the day, she'd learn how thoroughly she'd lost. Dana always slept late after a party. She called it decompression, though Greg had long suspected it was just the hangover of maintaining a persona. She stirred only once during the early morning quiet, mumbling something unintelligible and rolling onto his side of the bed like she hadn't already annexed every other inch of the house. Greg was in the kitchen by 7 a.m. made coffee, toasted a bagel, fed the neighbor's cat. They were out of town, and he had a key. Routine grounded him. So did the knowledge that, as he stirred a little creamer into his cup, a different kind of morning was already unfolding downtown. At 8:12 a.m., Dana's phone rang. Private number. She grunted, face half buried in the pillow. Then, without lifting her head, she slapped around the nightstand until she found it. Hello. Her voice was still thick with sleep and Chardonnay. Then came the pause. Greg heard it from downstairs, this odd pocket of silence, like the air had been sucked out of the second floor. Then he heard the sheets shift fast. A gasp. The creak of the headboard. The unmistakable bolt-upright moment. He didn't move. She thundered down the stairs in her robe, phone clutched in both hands like it was vibrating with explosives. Greg, she said, tight-lipped, wide-eyed. Did you do something? He looked up from his coffee, one eyebrow slightly raised. Something like what? They just called. From the office. Her hand was shaking. It was Angela, my boss's assistant. She told me I need to come in. Immediately. Not to use the company laptop. To bring my personal phone. She held the device up like she expected him to confess into it. Greg took a slow sip of coffee. Sounds serious. She narrowed her eyes. Greg. He leaned back in the chair, the morning sun hitting his face through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. He held her gaze, then said, softly, like reciting a reminder on a shopping list. I'm just the loser, remember? Dana opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just air. Her expression flickered, confusion, suspicion, maybe even fear, but it couldn't stick. Not yet. She wasn't used to being on the back foot. Greg stood up slowly, brought his mug to the sink, and rinsed it out. You should get dressed, he said without looking at her. Wouldn't want to keep Angela waiting. Dana didn't move. Just stood in the kitchen like someone had pulled the rug out from under her favorite fantasy and left her barefoot on the cold floor of reality. Greg walked past her to the front window and pulled the curtain aside, just a sliver. Outside, the world went on as usual. A dog walker. A jogger. The mail truck rolling up the hill. He didn't need to ask if the call had anything to do with the ethics hotline submission. He already knew it did. The timestamp, the file, the folder, all synced, encrypted, triggered with a delay. The bomb had gone off. All that was left now was the fallout. Dana turned slowly toward the stairs, her fingers still curled around the phone like it might offer salvation if she stared hard enough. Greg sat back down. He picked up the paper, flipped past the sports section, unfolded the crossword. Outside, a car engine roared to life. Tires squealed just slightly. He smiled at 5 down. Consequence, 5 letters. Answer, truth. Dana tore out of the driveway like the house was on fire. No makeup, hair barely combed, dress shirt half-buttoned over leggings she probably forgot weren't pants. Her bag was still open on the passenger seat, papers, cosmetics, and a phone charger spilling like entrails. The garage door hadn't even finished lifting when she slammed the car into reverse and nearly clipped the trash bins. Greg didn't flinch. He stood behind the curtain in the upstairs hallway, the one that gave a perfect diagonal view of the street. Not enough to be seen, just enough to see. As her taillights whipped around the corner, he pulled out his phone and sent a single message. She's in motion. Delivered. Read. No emoji. No follow-up. That friend, if you could still call him that, had worked compliance at Dana's firm for over a decade before they axed half the team in a budget shuffle. Greg had stayed in touch. They bonded years ago over dry ribs and a mutual disdain for performative management. When Greg reached out a few weeks back asking for a friendly ear off the record, the guy didn't even hesitate. Now, the chess pieces were moving. The report Greg submitted, disguised as an anonymous ethics complaint, had officially cleared intake. That meant timestamped confirmation, logged IP routing through a masked VPN, and direct delivery to internal legal with a reference number. That same reference number was attached to the video. Not a video. The video. The one Dana recorded, stupidly, while pretending to be discreet. Hotel suite, Mick's voice muffled in the background, and Dana spinning toward the camera in lingerie with a giggle. This is way better than those sad little work dinners. Huh? The footage wasn't pornographic, not entirely. But it didn't need to be. The timestamp, the metadata, the audio, it all told the story. Greg didn't send the riskiest videos. He didn't need to. He sent the right one. The one with her laughing as she held a glass of wine purchased on the corporate card at a resort labeled in her calendar as client relations training. The compliance friend had watched it. Called it clean, which in that world meant damning. No ambiguity. No plausible deniability. Just a well-edited montage of arrogance and poor judgment. Greg backed away from the window, finally, when her car disappeared past the hill. He walked to the closet and pulled out a small fireproof lockbox. Inside, a backup drive, 2 manila folders, and a typed letter with a sticky note that simply said, "In the event of escalation." He didn't think it would come to that. But then again, Dana never thought he would come to this. He sat on the bed, slowly unlacing his shoes. No rush. The next few hours weren't his to manage. They belonged to her now. Her lies. Her performance. Her damage control. He imagined her trying to stay composed while Angela greeted her at the office. Trying to explain why her phone was ringing nonstop. Trying to act like everything was normal when her team was already whispering. Because word always spreads faster than memos. He imagined her eyes scanning every phase for signs of knowledge, every sentence for subtext. She'd walk into that building thinking she could bluff her way through anything. But Greg had engineered systems for 30 years. He knew the moment a load-bearing structure started to fail. Dana was already cracking. And the best part? He hadn't even touched her. He just showed the right people where to look. The first vibration came as Greg was slicing into his eggs. Sunny side up. Just how his dad liked them. His mother was sipping tea, her posture still regal despite the years, her pinky always slightly lifted. They talked about the garden. Tomatoes coming in late this year. The tulips didn't make it through the frost. Normal things. Anchoring things. Buzz. He glanced at the screen. Dana. He didn't open it. Not because he was afraid of what she might say, but because he already knew. Buzz. Buzz. Then again. A pause. Another. They started to stack. His phone danced across the table like a restless insect. He silenced it and slid it into his pocket. His mother noticed, of course. She always noticed everything, even when she didn't say a word. "You all right, sweetheart?" she asked gently, not looking up from buttering her toast. Greg nodded, calm. Just Dana having a rough morning. His father chuckled dryly, barely glancing over his newspaper. Shouldn't have made fun of the cook, then. Greg actually smiled at that. First real smile in days. Maybe weeks. By the time the syrup hit the pancakes, Dana had sent 12 messages. By the coffee refill, she was at 24. At message 37, the tone shifted. The first ones were panicked, rage, and quick bursts. "What did you send them? I need you to answer me. You don't understand what you've done." As if she thought this was some mistake. Like he'd accidentally tripped over her little affair and fumbled it into HR. As if the evidence folder had built itself overnight. As if her career had cracked under the weight of his confusion, not her ego. Greg kept sipping coffee, letting the storm swell in the pocket of his jeans. His mom began telling a story about the first time Greg rode a bike without training wheels. His dad interjected with the correction that it was, in fact, a tricycle, and the two fell into a warm, familiar bicker. He liked that story. When text number 51 came through, he finally pulled the phone from his pocket, not to read the messages, but to mute the thread. Still, he glanced. It simply said, "Please, Greg, I'll explain everything." He stared at that line for a beat. That one made him pause, not because he believed her, but because of the absurdity of it. As if now, at this hour, this collapse, she finally thought explanations mattered. as if the word everything was even in her vocabulary. He set the phone face down on the table and nodded along to his mother's story. Something about scraped knees and a Band-Aid with cartoon ducks on it. Dana was unraveling. Every message was another stitch popping loose in the perfectly tailored narrative she'd sewn for herself. The empowered career woman, the charming mentor, the office favorite, the too-good-for-Greg wife who had outgrown. The man who once made her pasta from scratch on a Tuesday just because she said she missed Rome. Greg watched his parents. Listened to them finish each other's sentences. Noticed the way his dad still poured her tea first, even with shaky hands. And then he thought about Dana. Alone. In a cold office. Facing a wall of HR suits with her own words looped back to her in video form. Her own laughter used as Exhibit A. She had been building a narrative. He had just given it an ending. Dana was still breathless when she stepped into the elevator. Her ID badge didn't scan the first time. Her hands were trembling too hard to line it up. The security guard tried to make a joke about rough morning, but she didn't laugh. She didn't even look at him. 30 floors. She watched the numbers climb like a countdown to execution. Somewhere between 18 and 19, her legs started to shake. At 27, she put her hand on the railing. By 30, her reflection in the steel doors was a stranger, smeared mascara, collar twisted, sweat blooming under her arms. This wasn't the woman who'd stood in front of her team last week and declared herself a model for female leadership in corporate culture. The elevator opened. No one greeted her. No assistant with a coffee. No cheerful chatter. Just silence in a hallway that looked too long. At the end, conference room B. Inside, HR director. Her department head. Mick's boss. No Angela. No familiar lifeline. The seating arrangement said everything 3 on one side. 1 empty chair on the other. And a company-issued tissue box dead center. She hesitated in the doorway. The HR director motioned without a smile. Have a seat, Dana. She did. They let her settle in before sliding the laptop across the table. It was already queued up. No introduction. No preamble. Just a question. Do you deny this footage is you and Mick, filmed while using the corporate travel card for a client visit? Dana blinked. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She glanced down at the laptop. There it was. Her laugh. Her champagne glass. The flick of her hand brushing Mick's tie as they stood in a hotel suite that was not on the approved list. Her voice, clear as a bell. This is way better than that fake dinner with the IT guys. Another laugh. Then Mick's voice. Think Greg suspects anything? And her response, so flippant, so casual. Please. He still makes me lunch like a grateful little puppy. She slapped her own thigh in the video. Back in the room, the silence was brutal. The HR director leaned back. Her department head's face was blank, but his fingers were clenched on the table. Mick's boss? Not angry. Disgusted. He looked like he'd smelled something rotting. Dana started to speak, stopped, then reached for the tissue box. 1, 2. She dabbed at her eyes. Tried to compose herself. This has been taken out of context, she said finally, her voice breaking. It was not what it looks like. The HR director cut her off without raising his voice. Dana, this wasn't a one-time lapse. This is a pattern. We've cross-referenced your calendar entries with the corporate card charges. The video alone. I was drunk, she blurted. It wasn't official travel, I know that. But it wasn't a client visit, either. It was just personal. Stupid. Okay? We weren't trying to cheat the company. Then why did you log the hotel under client hosting? Greenlight Ventures? Her boss snapped. Dana froze. The folder name. The falsified report. She had forgotten. Please, she said, voice smaller now. Please. Just give me a chance to explain to the board. I'll fix this. I'll resign from the promotion. I'll take the leave. Please don't ruin me over this. But the room didn't move. Not an inch of sympathy. Because she wasn't being punished for the affair. Not directly. That wasn't what disgusted them. That wasn't what got people fired. What got people fired was using the company's name, money, and credibility to finance a personal affair while simultaneously mocking a colleague, her own husband, and company resources on company time. That was what killed careers. And everyone in the room knew it. So when Dana began to cry, full, broken sobs, she wasn't just grieving the mistake. She was grieving the myth she built around herself. The untouchable star. And Greg? Greg had never needed to raise his voice. All he had to do was let the evidence speak louder than the persona. And it did. Mick broke before lunch. No spine, no fight, just a folded suit and a survival instinct. HR barely had to press. The minute they showed him the footage, he started sweating like a faucet and begging to handle this internally. But internal didn't mean quiet. It just meant fast. He played the only card men like him ever do when cornered. Blame the woman. She pressured me, he said, trying to look wounded. It wasn't like I wanted this. She made it seem like we had to take the trip. For optics. For team morale. I was afraid to say no, honestly. He made himself sound like a hostage. Like Dana was a siren in heels luring him into hotel receipts and misused budgets. Like he'd just been along for the ride, a good boy with bad judgment and a suddenly inconvenient erection. He called it a lapse. Just one. He called her charismatic, assertive, intimidating. And it worked. Sort of. By 11 a.m., Mick was terminated. Immediate dismissal. Badge deactivated. Security escorted him out the back. No time to pack his desk. Someone else would box up his stress ball collection and his company mug that read, "Trust me, I'm legal." Dana found out 30 minutes later. She was still in the conference room, waiting suspended in some kind of HR purgatory where coffee is withheld and clocks tick louder than your thoughts. When they re-entered, they had new expressions. Less disgust. More detachment. Like the decision had been moved from the heart to the ledger. Numbers, risk, damage control. Due to the nature of this ongoing matter, they said, you're being placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of a full internal investigation. Her voice cracked. Wait. Unpaid? No one nodded. No one blinked. She stood, almost knocked over the chair, pacing like a trapped animal. This is a misunderstanding. You have no idea what he's been like at home. He pushed me to travel. He didn't support. The HR director lifted a hand. Dana, we've reviewed the footage. We've read the emails. The language alone violates 3 different conduct clauses in your leadership contract. And then came the nail. The promotion is being rescinded. That word. Rescinded. Not paused. Not reviewed. Gone. Everything she'd paraded around the office for the past month, title bump, salary upgrade, corner office with the little view of the skyline, gone. And by the time she left that conference room, pale and red-eyed with a face blotched by humiliation, her team already knew. Because Mick had mouthed off to one of the analysts while being escorted out. Because someone overheard the words hotel, affair, and HR cluster in the break room and posted a vague status on Slack. Some promotions don't age well. Her name was circulating like blood in shark water. And Dana, once the golden girl of the quarter, the face of the Women in Power campaign, was now radioactive. People didn't make eye contact. Even her assistant deleted "Congrats, boss lady" from her Instagram story. No calls. No messages. Just the quiet unraveling of everything Dana had built, tied neatly to a USB drive Greg had uploaded from their living room 24 hours earlier while she rehearsed her speech about vision and grit. And she still didn't know the worst part. That Greg hadn't even sent the most damning clip. He hadn't needed to. Because sometimes, the smallest leaks sink the grandest ships. And Dana? She was already deep below the waterline. The house was quiet again. No footsteps pacing upstairs. No barking into Bluetooth earbuds. No keyboard clatter as Dana fired off her daily gospel of micromanagement from the home office. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling like a body exhaling after holding its breath too long. Greg sat in the living room, legs crossed, rereading an old paperback he hadn't touched in years. It was missing the back cover. He didn't care. He wasn't really reading, anyway. It had been 2 days since Dana's implosion. She hadn't come home. Not after the suspension, not after the promotion vanished, not after she slunk out of that skyscraper with her coat wrinkled under her arm and her purse half-zipped like dignity had become optional. Her car was still gone. Her closet untouched. He thought maybe she'd show up at midnight. Maybe drunk. Maybe crying. Maybe with some melodramatic monologue about how he didn't understand what it's like to be under pressure all the time. But she didn't. No messages. No keys in the door. Nothing. Until his phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code. He answered anyway. Greg. It was Dana's sister, Melissa. Her voice had that tense kindness people use when they're asking for something while pretending they're not. He leaned back into the chair. Hey, Melissa. I don't want to intrude, she began, her voice already straining. But have you heard from her? No. She's not answering any of us. Not Mom, not me. We think she might be in a dark place. Greg said nothing. Melissa hesitated, then continued. I'm not saying you did anything. She's not well. She said some really strange things on the phone last night. About her job, her life, regrets. She sounded. Greg closed the book softly and set it on the armrest. Did she mention the part where she toasted me as a loser in front of my parents? Melissa went quiet. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Did she say anything about mocking me in front of my father, who, by the way, has a limited number of nights left on this planet, and doing it with a smirk so wide I could see the outline of her next affair in her molars? Greg, Melissa's voice was a whisper now. She's spiraling. She's not the Dana you knew. Greg chuckled once, bitter and hollow. You think I don't know that? I'm not saying you're responsible. I'm just saying she might not have anyone else to turn to. He stared out the window. The street was still. No car. No silhouette. Just the amber hue of a porch light that never shut off unless he flicked the switch himself. She made her choice, he said finally, each word placed with surgical precision. She humiliated me in front of my family. She laughed at my loyalty. She gambled a good life for ego and a cheap affair with a man who folds faster than laundry. And now that it's all blown up in her face, she wants me to catch the pieces. She's still your wife. Greg took a slow breath. No, she was my wife. Now she's just the punchline to a cake joke. He could hear Melissa breathing on the other end, caught between sympathy and horror. Then, softly, almost inaudibly, Greg added, let her feel it, Melissa. Let her sit in it. The shame, the silence, the loss. I've been sitting in it for years. He hung up. No rage. No slamming. Just a soft click. And for the first time in a very long while, he looked around the quiet house, not as a prison he had to tiptoe through, but as a space he could finally breathe in. The ghosts of humiliation were still there, but they were starting to shut up. The messages hadn't stopped, not really. They just started arriving in quieter waves. Desperation has a rhythm, and Dana had finally moved into the pleading phase. Her sentences were longer now. Less venom, more fear. The ego had burned off. All that was left was a woman clawing through her own wreckage, texting from whatever hotel or friend's couch she'd fled to. By the time Greg scrolled past message number 192, his phone was warm in his palm. Please. You're the only one who knows how to fix this. No threats. No gaslighting. Just that, please. She finally said it. He could see her in his mind's eye, sitting on the edge of a borrowed bed, makeup streaked, phone clutched like a life vest in open water. Maybe her nails were still perfectly done. Maybe not. Didn't matter. She was unraveling now. He didn't respond right away. He went to the kitchen, refilled his coffee, sat at the same table where she once barked into her laptop while he brought her toast. Then he opened his photos, scrolled past the vacation shots. The dinner they had 2 anniversaries ago before her eyes started glazing over mid-conversation. Past the blurry concert pic she insisted they take even though he hated crowds. Until he found it. The cake. She'd taken that photo herself before the guests arrived. She had wanted to post it. A perfect, curated shot of success with her funny little jab scribbled in black icing. To my husband, thanks for nothing. She'd even done a second take because the lighting wasn't dramatic enough. Greg remembered that. She made him hold a ring light. Said her phone camera didn't capture the mood right. The mood being smug, untouchable, victorious. He saved the image. Opened the text thread. Uploaded the photo. No caption. Not yet. Then, with slow, deliberate precision, he added a line beneath it. Now you know how it feels. Send. And that was it. He muted the thread again. Put the phone face down. Then he stood by the window and watched the neighborhood breathe. Children walking home from school. A couple arguing softly by their mailbox. A delivery truck honking at a dog in the street. Normal life. Other lives. Not hers anymore. Her silence stretched into the afternoon. No reply. No bubble. Just the digital vacuum left behind when a narcissist runs out of mirrors. Greg didn't need her response, because that image wasn't for a conversation. It was a memorial, not to their marriage. That had died a long time ago. It was a funeral for the version of Dana who thought she could destroy him in public and still expect him to rescue her in private. The cake had just been sugar and sponge, but now it was a gravestone. And Dana? She'd finally read the inscription. 2 weeks later, Greg stood in front of a room full of engineers and project leads, wearing a new blazer that still had a bit of that stiff store crease in the sleeves. The firm was local, but well-funded, young blood mixed with old heads, a company trying to do things right in an industry that usually didn't. He hadn't applied. They'd called him. Someone on their leadership team had heard what happened. Not all the sordid details, just the outline. A long-married man in middle management who had handled a professional disruption with composure. That was the word they used, composure. The HR grapevine sanitized everything, but the core of it remained. A betrayal. A scandal. A man who didn't scream or implode, just repositioned and moved forward. That intrigued them. They didn't want drama. They wanted structure. They wanted someone who could walk through a fire and not bring the smoke with him. The offer came fast. Consulting lead, flexible hours, remote-friendly, triple his previous salary. He didn't even hesitate. He gave 2 weeks' notice at his old job, not out of obligation, but because closure mattered. He left clean. Empty desk. Thanked the admin staff. Declined the goodbye sheet cake someone had ordered at the last minute. He didn't need another cake. At the welcome luncheon, a younger guy named Brent, project manager, clearly bright but a little too eager, sat across from him with a salad he wasn't eating and said, "So what inspired the switch?" After all these years. Greg stirred his coffee, looked around. The room was warm, safe. No passive aggression, no performance masks. He leaned back and smiled. Not big, not smug, just a half smile like the beginning of a private joke. "A cake," he said. Brent blinked. "Sorry, a joke," Greg added, letting the words settle. And the moment I realized silence is more powerful than revenge. Brent gave a polite chuckle, confused but respectful. He moved on, asked about project scopes, agile methodology, vendor procurement. Greg answered, calmly, clearly, like a man who hadn't just climbed out of a war zone, but had designed the map that trapped the enemy in it. Later that afternoon, while touring the office, he passed a break room with a whiteboard where someone had written in marker, "Speak softly and carry a big spreadsheet." He almost laughed. He thought of Dana, wherever she was now, probably crafting a new narrative, probably telling herself that Greg had ruined her career because he couldn't handle a strong woman, that it was retaliation, patriarchy, or some other buzzword she'd weaponized to avoid accountability. He didn't care. He didn't need an apology. The silence he'd left her in was louder than any apology she could fake. In his car that night, Greg opened the glove compartment and removed the USB drive. He held it in his hand, turned it over. Then he dropped it in the center console and closed it gently. Not because he needed to forget, but because he no longer needed to remember. There are some victories that don't require parades. Just peace. She walked through the front door like nothing had happened. Denise always had this performance-ready smile, too white, too symmetrical, like it had been calibrated in a lab. "I'm back, honey," she called, setting her designer duffel down by the entryway like a returning heroine from some soul-cleansing pilgrimage. Her yoga mat was slung over her shoulder, pristine. Not a scuff on the edge. I suppose enlightenment doesn't involve sweat anymore. She didn't expect me to be up. I'm usually asleep by the time her retreats end. At least, that's what she counted on. "Gur, you're up early," she said with that chirp in her voice that used to mean something. I didn't answer. I placed the last fork down next to the scrambled eggs. 3 eggs. 2 plates. She walked into the kitchen, barefoot, humming some generic spa tune like she hadn't just returned from 3 nights of God knows what, her perfume trailing behind her like a warning. Not the one she usually wore. This one was newer, sharper, male, like the cologne samples you get from GQ inserts. I knew the brand. It was in our guest bathroom last month. All right, fellas, quick break. We're shooting for 10K subscribers. If you're enjoying these gripping tales of betrayal, hit that subscribe button And let's get back to the story. Denise walked up behind me and kissed my cheek. A whisper of contact, more muscle memory than affection. Eggs? You spoil me, she grinned, then glanced at the clock. Wow, you really missed me, huh? Breakfast at 6? Felt like the right day for it, I said, steady as granite. You're home early. She shrugged, opening the fridge to grab orange juice. Tanya had to leave a day early, so the whole retreat ended early. Flights were cheaper today anyway. Win-win. Always thinking smart, I said. She missed the sarcasm. Or maybe she chose to. The kettle on the stove let out a shrill whistle, so I turned the heat off and poured the water into the teapot. Mint chamomile. Her favorite. She still thinks I don't remember that. She also thinks I don't know what real yoga retreats offer. Hint, they don't involve cabanas and king suites with ocean views. She reached for a mug and opened the cabinet and paused. Where's the red one? She asked, blinking. My mug. I shrugged. Must be in the dishwasher. It wasn't. She didn't press. She poured the juice and leaned against the counter, sipping it slowly, her eyes scanning the room with the kind of flicker that told me she sensed something was off. Not enough to panic. Just enough to wrinkle that Botox-lined forehead. Did you clean while I was gone? She asked. I nodded. Little spring cleaning. In January? I smiled. I like being ahead of schedule. She opened her mouth to say something else, but then stopped. A sound. A soft clink. A mug being set down on the coffee table in the living room. Her posture stiffened, barely. She turned her head slightly toward the sound. Then her shoulders dropped, playing it cool. Did you leave the TV on? She asked. Nope. She took one step toward the living room, then paused. Are you expecting someone? I am. She looked back at me. There it was. The twitch. The first real crack in the mask. Barely perceptible, but I'd been watching that face for 25 years. I knew what a tremor looked like under a smile. She took another step. Who is it? I poured her a cup of tea. You'll see. Her eyes narrowed. Gerald. I looked at her fully now. You were gone for 4 days. 3. 4. I said calmly. You left Thursday morning. It's Monday. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. Then, without a word, she turned and walked slowly toward the living room. Her gait changed. Shoulders up. Chin lifted. That fake confidence you throw on when you're bluffing and hoping no one calls it. And then she stepped into the room. I didn't follow. I just listened. There was no gasp. No scream. Just silence. Tight, pressurized silence, like the seconds after a car crash when you haven't felt the pain yet, but you know it's coming. Then a single word, clipped and cold. You. I smiled into the steam of the teacup. And I waited. It started with the lavender bath salts. 2 years ago, a jar appeared by the bathtub, lavender and eucalyptus, imported, ridiculously overpriced. Denise said it was for decompressing, something her yoga instructor had recommended after a chakra reset weekend. I'd nodded. I was tired. That was the year I retired and she started finding herself. Again. Then came the weekends away. Once every 2 months. Then monthly. Just me time, she'd say. We all need to refill our cup. Sure. I refilled mine with black coffee and chores. She refilled hers with lattes and hotel robes I never saw unpacked. But I didn't question it. Not then. That was my mistake, or my advantage, depending on how you want to look at it. Because when someone thinks you're too slow to catch up, they stop running. She always left on Fridays, always packed the same duffel, maroon, soft-sided, with a tiny blue sticker still half torn on the bottom. I remember odd details. Always have. When you've spent 40 years in a railroad control room, your brain gets wired for patterns. You know how to listen for rhythms. You know when a signal doesn't match the track. It took me a year to realize she always left after an ATM withdrawal. Not a big one, $140. Then $160. Always in cash. Always from the same machine 10 miles from our house. Not hers. Not mine. A shared branch near the interstate. I started saving receipts. She didn't notice. She never noticed. That's what made it easy. Then came the phone calls. Short. Soft. Always from the patio when she thought I was asleep. I'd catch fragments. No, he doesn't ask. Yeah, same place. Tell her it's yoga again. Tell her? That's when I started logging times. That's when I got the burner phone. I didn't go full detective. Not at first. I just started keeping things. Screenshots. Gas receipts that didn't match the miles on her car. Once, she told me she was at a weekend silent retreat in Blue Ash. Her Fitted app said she walked 12,000 steps at 1 a.m. at the Marriott in Columbus. Oops. Still, I didn't confront. I nodded. I asked how the silence was. She said it was transformative. I bet it was. Then I called Daniel. Daniel's not a private investigator by trade. He's an ex-rail guy like me, got bored in retirement, and took a part-time surveillance work for divorce attorneys. He'd owed me a favor since 2003 when I helped him bury a rail complaint that would have cost him his pension. This was a good time to collect. He started trailing her. Discreetly. 3 weekends in a row, she told me she was at some woodland spot with Tibetan gongs and communal smoothies. Daniel sent me footage. Same man, different city, always the same room number. Suite 402. The guy was younger. Maybe 40. Balding. Drove a black Lexus with dealer plates. Not some slick gigolo. More like a real estate douche with a Costco cologne budget. In the second video, she kissed him in the parking garage and laughed. It was a mean laugh. The kind you give someone when you think they'll never see it. I watched it once. Then again. And then I closed the laptop and went to the garage. I needed a project. Something to do with my hands. Something useful. So I took apart her old filing cabinet. The one she kept her journals in. Turns out she wasn't much of a writer. But there were notes. Slips. One from a boutique spa with the line item, room service. 2 omelets, 1 bottle of Prosecco, extra towels. I started building a file. Every retreat. Every location. Every receipt cross-matched with a map. Then I bought a safe. She didn't even notice it. Sat in the garage next to the water heater. Funny thing is, she started getting bolder. Maybe she thought I was getting older. Slower. More tired. She came home one Sunday in January smelling like chlorine and cheap peppermint gum. Said they had a pool cleanse ceremony. I just nodded. Bet that was refreshing. She smiled, kissed me, and said, "You never question anything. I love that about you." I nodded again. I know. And that was the last lie I let pass without a response. Because by then, I had made one more important call. And the person on the other end didn't answer with hello. She answered with, "You finally ready?" I was. The first thing she noticed was the rug. That floral monstrosity she bought from that overpriced interior design studio downtown gone. The one she insisted tied the room together, like we lived in a magazine. I rolled it up the night before she got back and stuffed it into the shed next to the mower she never touched. The hardwood underneath looked cleaner. Colder. She stood there, blinking. Where's the rug? I didn't even look up from the stove. Needed refinishing. Didn't match the new layout. She laughed nervously. You rearranged the house while I was gone? I had time, I said. And motive. Her brow pinched, but she forced another smile. Her smiles were always louder than her doubts. Well, looks different. Oh, it did. Her yoga books were gone from the coffee table, replaced by a copy of The Art of War. Petty? Maybe. But contextually satisfying. The hallway mirror was missing too. The one she used to rehearse her facial expressions before leaving for retreats. I'd caught her once. Practicing smiles. She didn't know I was watching. She probably forgot it ever happened. I didn't. And the photos, oh, the photos. She must have noticed, but she didn't say it out loud. The framed vacation picture from Hilton Head, the candid from our anniversary in Charleston, the awkwardly lit selfie from her friend's wedding all gone. Replaced with one solitary frame. A black and white shot of me, 1982, covered in grease, fixing a busted signal relay. She used to make fun of that photo. You look like a mechanic who lost a fight with a train. Now it was centerpiece. Smells like coffee, she said, stepping deeper into the room. Fresh pot, I said. Made 2 cups. She stopped by the archway that separated the kitchen from the living room. I could see her shoulders stiffen. The light in the room wasn't the same brighter now that I took down those gauzy curtains she'd insisted were mood-setting. The room used to be her stage. Now it felt more like an interrogation room. And she felt it. I watched her feet. Subtle hesitation. She didn't know why yet, but her instincts were whispering. The photos. The rug. The bookshelf reorganized, the throw pillows reversed, her scented candles swapped for mine, cedar and pipe tobacco. A slow, quiet defiance in every inch. Then, the sound. A soft sip. Ceramic on glass. She froze. There was someone in the living room. And not just someone. Someone confident enough to sit there in silence and drink coffee in her house. Gerald, she said, her voice low now. No more playful lilt. Whose? She stepped forward. I leaned against the counter, watching, silent. She walked past the threshold and into the living room. Her body moved like a hunting cat, slow, calculating, unsure of what was behind the noise. That's when she saw her. Back straight, legs crossed, calm, holding a mug with both hands like it belonged there. Wearing a charcoal gray blazer, like she had just walked out of a courtroom and into a chess match. Her smile wasn't wide. It was patient. Grace. And that name hadn't been spoken in our home in over 2 decades. Denise stopped mid-step. Grace lifted her mug slightly. Morning. The mug hit the coaster with a soft click. Denise didn't answer. Her jaw clenched. I could hear the faint sound of her fingernails digging into her palm. She glanced back at me, like this was a bad dream, and I'd laugh and say, gotcha. I didn't move. She turned back to Grace. Still no words. Grace sipped again, then looked around the room. New layout's nice. Feels honest. Denise's voice finally found its way through the shock. What are you doing here? Grace looked at me. I looked at Denise. And I said, she's here to help me finish something I should have ended a long time ago. And just like that, the walls she thought were hers started to whisper that they were never hers at all. She didn't blink. That's how I knew she was panicking. Denise always blinked too much when she was lying. Little rapid-fire flutters like her brain was buffering. But right now, her eyes locked, unblinking, bloodshot and stunned, fixated on the woman she thought she'd erased 2 decades ago. Grace didn't flinch under the stare. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat, just gave a calm, measured nod, like they were old colleagues bumping into each other at a networking event, not 2 women whose silent war had simmered beneath my marriage for a quarter of a century. And then came the twitch. Not a full-body shudder, no. Denise was too polished for that. But the corner of her mouth, the right side, always the right, jerked, like a wire got cut in her smile circuit. I'd seen it once before, the night she realized my mother had left her out of the will. That same stunned glitch in her facade. Back then, she excused herself to cry in the bathroom for 40 minutes and came out with a tear-streaked apology and a mysterious new handbag a week later. This time, no out, just exposure. She took one breath, then tried to reset. Her lips parted, as if preparing a sentence, some clever volley. But all that came out was a wheeze of stale air, no script, no spin. The mug in Grace's hand met the glass coaster with a soft, devastating clink. That sound broke the spell. Denise's gaze snapped to it like a deer catching a rifle click. I stepped forward from the kitchen and walked slowly toward the couch. Not rushing, not raising my voice. Just the sound of my boots brushing the floor with each deliberate step. Denise turned toward me, as if pleading silently for an explanation, something, anything, that would let her file this under some kind of social misunderstanding. Coffee? I asked Grace, settling next to her. She offered me a faint smile. Still warm. I poured myself a cup, sat down beside her like this was just another Tuesday morning. In a way it was. For me. I'd been living in this scene for months, replaying it in my mind, rewriting every detail until the delivery was perfect. Denise stayed standing. She looked at us like she'd stepped on stage at the wrong part of the play and didn't know her lines. I don't understand, she finally muttered. Why is she here? Because you invited her, I said, taking a sip. What? Her voice cracked on the consonant. I haven't spoken to her in. I cut her off, softly. 25 years. I know. Almost to the month. Grace crossed one leg over the other, eyes never leaving Denise. You really thought I wouldn't show up again, didn't you? I didn't think about you at all, Denise shot back, voice sharpening now, her equilibrium trying to reboot. I don't even know what this is. Oh, you will, I said. Calm. Measured. Like I was explaining the weather. Denise laughed once, dry, hollow, forced. So this is some ambush? What? You 2 got back in touch and decided to what? Ruin my morning. I glanced around the room. You did that yourself. She looked at Grace, then at me, then back again, eyes darting like someone trying to read a foreign language out of order. You're serious, she said slowly. You're actually serious. I set my mug down. She noticed the coaster. It wasn't the one she bought. Hers had gold trim. This one was leather. Mine. The subtle cues were mounting, and she was finally starting to smell the smoke. "You know what this looks like?" she said. "It looks pathetic." Grace raised an eyebrow. Pathetic was booking Suite 402 with a man who calls himself Rafe and sells waterfront timeshares in Dayton. Denise's face paled. "Oh, so she remembered that name." I leaned back. "She's not here to fight you. She's here because I asked her to be." "And why the hell would you?" "Because," I said, standing up slowly, "you wrote the first chapter of this. I'm just writing the last." She backed a step. The mug on the table steamed quietly between us. She didn't look at it, but I knew she saw it. And she knew. Whatever came next wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be final. Denise always loved to rewrite history. She had a talent for it, like a politician who smiles through a scandal, spinning a new version so casually you'd question your own memory. Over the years, she turned Grace into some minor character. A footnote. That old flame who never mattered. Even joked once, "You dodged a bullet there." She seemed clingy. I laughed back then. You have to laugh when you're being lied to so confidently. But I never forgot the truth. Not the first night Grace and I sat under that rusted-out water tower in Huron, splitting a bottle of cheap wine and talking about what a post-railroad life might look like. Not the way she knew how to read a track schedule faster than I could, or how she'd bring me sandwiches during graveyard shifts without asking what I wanted, just knowing. And I especially never forgot the day she vanished from my life without a goodbye. No closure, no fight, just a sudden, clean cut. For 25 years, I let that wound scab over, until I learned how it got sliced open in the first place. Grace hadn't left. Denise had pushed. It was the week before I proposed. I didn't know it at the time, but Grace had been getting anonymous notes in her mailbox. Simple messages, written in cheap ballpoint ink. "He's not who you think. He talks about you like you're a backup plan. He said you were needy." Always unsigned. She didn't tell me. She just pulled back. Grew cold. Confused. Denise, my then coworker, the woman who laughed too loud at my jokes in the break room, had watched it happen, orchestrated it, and waited. Grace told me later that she only connected the dots after seeing Denise at a holiday party, wearing the same perfume that had stained one of the envelopes. And now, sitting beside me again after all these years, Grace reached into a worn manila folder and slid a series of pages across the coffee table. No ceremony. Just the dull thud of weighty paper hitting wood. Denise didn't move. "They're copies," Grace said calmly. "You can keep them." I didn't look. I didn't need to. I'd already memorized them. Typed statements from two of Denise's old coworkers, one of whom had long since moved to Florida, both confirming what I'd suspected for years, that Denise had asked around about Grace, whispered rumors, even bragged that she knew how to eliminate competition. One remembered her exact words: "He doesn't need a girl who understands signals. He needs one who sends them." Another page showed a timeline. Denise's early text messages to a friend, ones Grace retrieved during a brief legal audit involving a shared phone plan. That's how far this rabbit hole went. Denise leaned over the papers like they were written in Greek. She touched one with 2 fingers, tracing the ink as if willing it to change. "What is this supposed to prove?" she muttered. "This is ancient. You're digging up." "What?" "Ancient drama." Grace didn't blink. "No. I'm showing him what was stolen." Denise's head jerked up. "Stolen?" "I didn't." "You did," Grace cut in, her voice still cool, but no longer soft. "You didn't just play dirty. You made sure I'd never get the chance to say goodbye." Denise scoffed. "Oh, please. You think he would have stayed with you?" "I know he would have," Grace said, then turned to me. "But it's not about that anymore." I nodded, still silent. Because the thing was, Grace wasn't here to rekindle anything. She wasn't here out of revenge. She was here to close a loop. I stood up and walked to the mantel. Took down the only photo still hanging, our wedding portrait. Denise had chosen the frame herself, dark cherry wood, engraved with endless journey. I handed it to her. She didn't take it. "Gerald," she said, breath thin, this doesn't matter anymore." "That's the problem," I said, placing it on the table next to the documents. "You built our life on the idea that none of it ever mattered." She opened her mouth again, but Grace interrupted. "I didn't come here to fight," she said. "I came to give back what you stole. I'm not staying. I've got a flight at 2. Denise blinked again. Then why now? Grace looked right at her. Because he finally asked. The room sat in thick silence. And in that moment, I watched Denise realize something she had never prepared for. I had a history before her, and now it had come home. Denise straightened her back like she was preparing for a deposition. It was a posture I'd seen many times, during arguments with service reps, with waiters, even with our daughter when she didn't make honor roll one semester. That chin-tilted, shoulders-squared stance that said, I run this room. This is my house, she said, voice clipped. I didn't say anything. I reached into the leather folder sitting on the coffee table, black, monogrammed, the one she gave me 10 years ago for Father's Day. To keep your crossword puzzles in, she'd joked. It had held documents ever since. Things she never bothered to check. From it, I pulled one sheet of paper and placed it flat on the table between us. Her eyes dropped. The deed. Signed, notarized, transferred. Her name, once listed under joint ownership, now conspicuously absent. She didn't pick it up right away. She stared at it, lips pressed into a line, so tight you could sharpen a blade with it. Then she reached down with 2 fingers, like it might be contaminated, and lifted the corner. Her eyes scanned. Her throat clicked as she swallowed. The muscles in her jaw flexed like a vice slowly tightening. I don't understand, she said quietly. You signed the power of attorney forms 3 years ago, I replied. You said you didn't want to deal with property paperwork. Said it was boring. She looked at me like I'd just read her a death sentence in Morse code. So this is what? She snapped. A gotcha moment? No, I said. This is context. I slid over the second file. She hesitated, then opened it. It was thick, tabbed, categorized, color-coded. I spent 3 weekends putting it together while she was away finding her sinner. Every page marked with GPS data, hotel invoices, meal charges, a cross-referenced calendar of every yoga retreat set against phone records and license plate hits from parking garages. Page 4 had a screenshot from the Marriott security cam. Page 7 was a copy of a receipt for 2 ribeyes and a bottle of Shiraz. The signature was hers, Denise L. Dodd, but the name on the room wasn't. She flipped faster now. Her breath became shallow, uneven. Flip, flip, flip. You think this proves something? She hissed. I stared at her. Everything. She shoved the file shut with one palm. You've been spying on me? No, I said. I've been documenting. There's a difference. Spying is when you don't trust someone. Documenting is when you already know. Her laugh was sudden and sharp. Jesus, Gerald. You went full forensic accountant over a few hotel nights. 18 weekends, I said. 7 cities. 3 aliases. 1 Lexus. And a bottle of peppermint gum that's been discontinued since 2019. That one landed. She froze. Her hands curled at her sides. So what now? You think this earns you a medal? No, I said again. I'm not here to win. I'm here to end. Denise stepped back. The woman who had orchestrated the silent unraveling of my life now stood speechless in the middle of the room she once controlled, walls repainted, pictures removed, scent replaced. You think this makes you some kind of hero? She barked. I'm not the hero, I said, standing up. You never married one. But I'm not your fool anymore, either. I turned to Grace. She handed me one last page of an affidavit. A statement from someone Denise hadn't considered, her friend Tanya. The retreat buddy. The one who, when offered immunity and a check for $300, had spilled every sordid detail of the weekends, the rendezvous, the excuses, even the schedule they used to keep their stories straight. Denise didn't ask what it was. She didn't have to. She knew she was standing in the wrong room, holding the wrong cards, and the game was already over. And for once, it was her turn to shut up and listen. Grace leaned forward, not like a predator circling wounded prey, but like a woman leveling with another human being who finally ran out of lies. There's something you never saw, Denise, she said, voice low but steady. While you were curating your little getaway life, Gerald was curating an escape route. Denise let out a half laugh, too brittle to be convincing. Oh, please. But I could see it, the flicker behind her eyes. That creeping nausea that starts in the gut when your world begins to come apart at the financial seams. Grace didn't blink. She reached for the folder again and pulled out a shorter stack, only 10 pages. Each one a nail. This is the cabin, Grace said, holding up the first document. Purchased 18 months ago. Upstate. Lakefront. He used the trust you mocked him for setting up. You said, only rich people need those. Turns out rich people and prepared people have one thing in common. They don't like surprises. Denise's jaw tightened. I could tell she wanted to speak, but her body wouldn't let her just yet. The retirement account, Grace continued, flipping to the next page. Rolled into a solo 401k. Done legally. Quietly. Your name was removed the same week you posted that picture with your yoga sisters in Cabo. It was a joke trip. Denise finally managed to croak out. I told you. No, I cut in. You told me you were working through trauma, that you needed space, that you needed to heal. You were wearing matching bikinis with a guy named Rafe whose hand was on your thigh. Grace flipped to the next page. The Tahoe. You thought it was yours. You told your sister you'd get it in the divorce. Funny thing is, the registration was never transferred. It's under the name of Gerald's LLC. You'd know that if you ever opened the glove box. Denise's face flushed now, red climbing up her neck like fire licking a fuse. You're manipulating this. You're both. No, Grace said dead calm. He's reclaiming it. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just sat back and let her feel it. Because this wasn't about the money, not really. It was about taking apart the safe little structure she'd built brick by brick, a fantasy where I would always be there, always pay, always stay. And now, she didn't even know what was hers anymore. I paid the taxes on the cabin, she snapped. That came from my bonus check. No, I said. Your bonus check paid for 3 months of the Lexus lease and a personal wellness coach named Elena. I intercepted the bank notifications. Her mouth opened, then closed. She was running out of oxygen, of lies, of leverage. Gerald, she said, more quietly now. We can work something out. There's nothing left to work, I replied. I spent 2 years watching the woman I married reinvent herself as someone who thought lies were self-care and cheating was a reward. Meanwhile, I sold off the fantasy in pieces. You just didn't notice. Grace handed over the last 2 documents. One was a printout of the family trust structure. The other was a list of asset transfers filed under my name, cross-referenced, time-stamped, signed. I didn't just catch you, I said. I replaced you. Denise's lips trembled. You can't. I already did. She looked around the room like someone realizing the lights were never on to begin with. The rug gone. The photo frames replaced. The walls bare, like a house waiting for new occupants, or better yet, to be left behind. She whispered, You've been planning this the whole time. And I said, simply, No, Denise. You planned this. I just kept the receipts. I reached into my pocket. The living room had gone quiet, too quiet. That kind of silence you only hear before a building comes down. Denise stood rigid, hands clenched at her sides like she could hold reality together by sheer force. Grace watched her calmly, arms folded across her chest, like she'd seen this exact collapse before and knew better than to interrupt. I pulled out the phone. Denise's eyes snapped to it instantly. Her posture shifted, just slightly. She didn't know what I had queued up, but her body did. You could see it in the way she unconsciously stepped forward, not close, not confrontational, but just enough to intervene if she needed to. I unlocked it, tapped the screen. The speaker crackled once, then began to play. A low rustle, the kind that comes from cotton sheets and cheap hotel duvet covers. A chuckle. Her chuckle. Not the one she used at home. This one was unfiltered, confident, cruel. Then her voice, clear and unmistakable. He'll never leave. He's harmless. He needs me. Laughter followed. Another voice, masculine, nasal, chimed in. You sure he's not catching on? Oh, please, she answered, giggling. He's like a golden retriever with a penchant. Loyal, dumb, and house-trained. Silence hit like a sledgehammer. Denise lunged. She moved fast, faster than I expected, but Grace was already ahead of her. She stepped in, caught Denise mid-swipe, and pushed her gently back with one hand against the chest. Denise stumbled, caught her footing, glared like an animal cornered for the first time in its life. Give me that phone, she hissed. You already gave me what I needed, I said, slipping it back into my pocket. Denise turned to me, eyes wide, mouth twisted into something between rage and panic. That's illegal. You can't record me in private. I'll sue. You can try, I said. But you weren't in Ohio? And it wasn't my recording. She blinked. What? It was sent to me, I added. From someone who was there. Someone who didn't like being laughed at when they realized he wasn't the only one. She froze. Now she wasn't just furious. She was exposed, raw, skinless, and standing in the middle of what used to be her domain with every pillar yanked out. Her hands trembled slightly. Her mouth opened again, but nothing came out. The words from the voicemail still hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't been extinguished. He's harmless. I let that sit. I used to believe that, I said, walking past her slowly. That being quiet was being weak. That being patient was being passive. But you know what I realized, Denise? She didn't answer. I stopped beside her, close enough for her to feel the heat off my words. I was never harmless, I said. I was just controlled. And the last time I let someone define me is the last time they'll ever do it. Her lower lip quivered. And Grace, bless her, didn't say a word. She just walked to the kitchen and poured herself another cup of coffee like she was watching a sad, predictable movie with a perfect ending. Denise stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of her own cleverness. Her secrets weren't just out, they were organized, dated, cross-examined, and now publicly played on a loop she couldn't shut off. And still, she hadn't cried. That was the part one didn't expect. Because even now, especially now, Denise still believed she could win. And that made her final loss all the more satisfying. Her voice was smaller now. Not broken. Denise never broke the way normal people did, but softened, smoothed out like a sales pitch at closing time. A voice not used to begging, but desperate enough to try. Gerald, she said, stepping toward me, eyes wide and glistening. We can fix this. I messed up. I did. But this? All of this? It's not us. It's not how we end. She moved her hand toward mine. I didn't pull away. I didn't meet her halfway either. I just let her words fall into the space between us, cold and echoing. Please, she whispered. You've always been solid. Safe. That's why she cut herself off. Regrouped. I lost track. That's all. I thought you'd always be there. I said. She blinked, hopeful. And then I wasn't. Denise's fingers curled slightly. She took another step. If this is about her, she flicked her chin toward Grace. Then fine. She got her little moment. But this doesn't need to go any further. I'll go to therapy. We'll go to therapy. We can write a new chapter. I turned to Grace. She nodded once, silent, understanding exactly what came next. She reached into her leather tote and pulled out a thick envelope. No dramatic flair, no slow reveal, just business. I took it from her, held it for a second, then handed it to Denise. She stared at it like it was on fire. What is this? She asked, but she already knew. You could see it in the way her thumb hesitated over the flap. A separation agreement, I said. Filed. Clean. Legal. Irrevocable. Her nostrils flared. You filed already? I told you, I said calmly. I stopped reacting a long time ago. I started preparing. She tore the envelope open and scanned the first page. Her breath caught. I watched her eyes race down the lines. The notarized signatures, the listed assets, the frozen joint accounts, the change of beneficiaries, the removal of health proxy rights. Then her shoulders sagged. You're choosing her? She asked quietly. After everything. After me. You're choosing Grace? I didn't even glance at Grace. No, I said. I'm choosing me this time. The line landed like a clean punch to the chest. Because that's what she never saw coming. Not Grace, not the documents, not the timeline. She thought her biggest threat was another woman. She never realized it was the man who stopped begging to be understood. She looked around the room like a castaway scanning for a shore that no longer existed. No framed pictures. No shared memories. No rug under her feet. Even the thermostat had been reset. I changed the code last week. Gerald, her voice cracked this time. And I could finally see it, the collapse of the illusion. This wasn't a bluff. There was no speech, no night of passion, no half-hearted promise that would unflip what had been turned. The world she manipulated into place with half-smiles and shoulder rubs and tight skirts was dissolving in front of her. And this time, the script didn't have her as the lead. I stepped away. Slowly, Grace stood beside me. Not touching, not interfering, just witnessing. You can stay the night, I said. Lawyer said I should give you 24 hours to vacate. But I'd rather not watch you pack. She looked at me, stunned. You're serious. Dead serious, I said. You'll find a list of the remaining items in the upstairs closet. Anything not claimed by noon tomorrow goes to donation. The envelope trembled in her hand. She opened her mouth again, but I raised a finger. No more monologues, I said. You had your turn. And for the first time in our marriage, Denise stood in front of me completely powerless, without words, without leverage, and without a clue who I really was when I stopped being what she needed. And that, I think, terrified her more than anything. She stood in the hallway like a broken antique, expensive, polished, but useless now. The envelope hung limp at her side, its edges bent from her grip. Her shoes were still off. Funny, she always insisted on no shoes in the house, said it was energy hygiene. Now she'd leave barefoot. I didn't say much, just walked her to the door, step by step, like I was escorting a stranger out of a museum I didn't remember inviting them into. She paused once in the hallway, right next to the coat rack, as if the sight of it would anchor her to something. But the jacket she was looking for wasn't there. I'd already boxed it up. The box sat by the door. Simple. Labeled D. Personal. One suitcase next to it. Nothing fancy. Nothing theatrical. Just logistics. Her fingers brushed the handle, then dropped. She turned to me. Eyes softer now. This didn't have to end like this. I tilted my head. Didn't it? She swallowed hard, blinking faster now. The mascara she always wore like armor finally began to run, like the ink in her story had smudged. Was any of it real? She asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know her that. She looked like she wanted to say something else, some final dagger, some guilt-shifting monologue about how I drove her away. But even she knew it wouldn't land. Not after everything. Not after the voice recording, the ledger, the photos, the trust, the paperwork that sat folded in her trembling hand, confirming she had lost not just me, but access, legacy, home. She reached for the doorknob, then paused. I loved you, Gerald, she said. No, I replied. You loved owning me. Silence. And then she stepped out. No slam. No storming off. Just quiet steps on the porch as she moved into the unfamiliar daylight. From the window, I saw her stop by the walkway. She turned, one last glance, hoping maybe I'd follow, that I'd soften, that I'd forget. But I was already back inside. The living room was peaceful now. Grace stood by the couch, mug in hand, steam faintly trailing from the lip. I sat down beside her, and she offered me my cup. I took it. It had gone cold. I didn't reheat it. Some things are meant to cool. Through the front window, Denise still stood at the curb, frozen, one foot on the sidewalk, the other in nowhere. She watched as Grace reached over and gently took my hand. That was when her shoulders finally sagged. That was when she realized there would be no second act, no dramatic redemption, no surprise reversal, just the sound of the front door clicking shut behind her. And on the other side of it, silence, peace, and 2 mugs of cold coffee. I leaned back into the couch, let the steam fade into nothing. And for the first time in 25 years, I didn't ask myself what she was thinking, because it didn't matter anymore.
The room erupted into applause as Brandon raised his glass, his voice booming with the kind of confidence only he could pull off. The banquet hall was dazzling. Golden chandeliers cast warm light over the elegantly set tables, and Emily, my pride and joy, sat at the center of it all, beaming in her cap and gown. To Emily, Brandon declared his smile wide and charming. A brilliant young woman, destined for greatness, and lucky for her. She's got her mom's beauty and her uncle's brains. Laughter rippled through the crowd, polite and quick, but the sting of his words was immediate. My grip on my glass tightened. Brandon wasn't done. Good thing she didn't inherit her father's brains, huh? He added with a grin that felt more like a blade. The room roared with laughter again, and I clenched my jaw, trying to mask my discomfort. Everyone found it hilarious. Everyone except me. I caught Melissa's reaction out of the corner of my eye, her head thrown back, laughing louder than anyone else at the table. But her laughter didn't sound genuine. It sounded forced, like a cracked vase barely holding together. Brandon stood taller, basking in the attention, and delivered the final blow with a grand gesture toward me. But hey, Nathan, don't worry. With Emily's talent and my connections at the hospital, we'll make sure she has a bright future. Maybe we can even find something for you, too. A polite chuckles filled the air, but they didn't mask the humiliation coursing through my veins. My modest job at the local hardware store wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I'd never once felt ashamed of it, not until now, not until the way Brandon's words made it sound like charity. Emily blushed and adjusted her glasses, mimicking the exact gesture Brandon had made moments before. The gesture was subtle, but I couldn't unsee it. My stomach twisted. It wasn't the joke itself. It was the ease, the familiarity with which Brandon said it, as if it wasn't a joke at all. And Melissa's laugh. Loud, deliberate, almost frantic, like she was trying to drown out something only she could hear. I forced a smile and clinked glasses with the person next to me, but my mind was racing. Brandon's words hung in the air like smoke, curling around my thoughts, choking them. The room blurred around me, the celebration muted in the back of my mind. Had I been blind, oblivious? As Brandon sat down, Melissa leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear, and they both smiled. Not at each other, but like co-conspirators sharing a secret. That's when I knew. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just a joke. And for the first time that night, I stopped celebrating and started noticing. The laughter from the celebration echoed in my ears long after the banquet ended. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Melissa was beside me, scrolling through her phone, her face lit by the cold glow of the screen. Emily was in the back seat, fast asleep, her cap still perched on her head, slightly tilted. Melissa broke the silence first. You didn't say much tonight. Didn't feel like I had much to say. I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. She shrugged, clearly uninterested in pushing the conversation further. Normally, I'd let it drop, but tonight wasn't normal. Brandon's voice was still ringing in my head, his words twisting and coiling like snakes. I didn't realize Brandon was so invested in Emily's future, I said, trying to sound casual. Melissa's head jerked up slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I glanced at her briefly before returning my focus to the road. Just that he seems to have a lot of opinions about her. That whole bit about her inheriting his brains seemed like an odd thing to say. Though Melissa let out a short laugh, but it wasn't her usual carefree kind. It was clipped, defensive. Oh, come on, Nathan. He was joking. You know how Brandon is, do I? That landed harder than I intended. Melissa stiffened, her phone slipping into her lap. Yes, she said sharply. You do. He's family, you've known him for years. I bit the inside of my cheek, forcing myself to stay calm. Yeah. Family. That's what I keep telling myself. The rest of the drive was silent, save for the hum of the engine and Emily's soft snores. That night, after Emily was tucked in and the house was quiet, I found myself in the kitchen, staring at the last glass of wine Melissa had poured before heading to bed. It sat there, untouched, the liquid dark and swirling under the dim light. My mind raced with questions, each one more damning than the last. Melissa's laugh, Brandon's smirk, the way Emily adjusted her glasses. I thought about everything I'd worked for over the past decade. The hours I'd spent at the hardware store, scrimping and saving every spare dollar to give Emily the future she deserved. I thought about her private school tuition, the violin lessons, the endless field trips. And then I thought about Brandon, the successful, respected doctor. The golden boy who could afford anything without batting an eye. The wine glass taunted me, but I didn't touch it. Instead, I grabbed my phone and pulled up Brandon's social media. I'd never paid much attention to his post before. Why would I? But tonight, I scrolled through them with a purpose. There were pictures of him with Emily at family gatherings, the two of them laughing or poozing together. His captions were always lighthearted, my favorite niece, or she's got my sense of humor, too many pictures. Too many comments. I looked closer, reading between the lines. There was something about the way he talked about her, the way Melissa always seemed to be in the background of those moments. And then I saw it, a photo from years ago, one I didn't even remember being taken. It was from Emily's 8th birthday party. Brandon was crouched beside her, helping her cut the cake. Melissa stood behind them, her hand on his shoulder, both of them smiling like they were the ones throwing the party together. Something cold and sharp twisted in my gut. I closed the app and opened another tab, typing in a search I never thought I'd have to make. It took me a few minutes to gather the courage, but I finally clicked buy now. The DNA test kit would arrive in 3 days. As I closed my phone, a part of me hoped I was wrong, that I was being paranoid, letting Brandon's jokes get under my skin. But deep down, I knew the truth was coming. And I wasn't ready for what I'd find. The DNA test kit arrived 2 days earlier than expected. It felt heavier than it should have, the weight of its implications pressing down on me as I carried it from the porch to the kitchen. Emily was at school, and Melissa had just left for her shift at the hospital. The house was quiet, too quiet. I opened the box with shaking hands, the sterile swabs and instructions staring back at me like a dare. My mind raced. What if I was wrong? What if all this suspicion was for nothing? But what if I was right? What if Brandon's smug grin and Melissa's hollow laughter were more than just harmless moments? Taking Emily's sample was easy. I'd been careful to collect it during breakfast the next day, pretending it was a fun science experiment for a school project. She laughed, rolling her eyes, but humored me like the sweet, trusting girl she was. Once her sample was secured, I took mine and sealed the envelope. Every step of the process felt like I was locking away a piece of my life, sending it off to be dissected, analyzed, judged. The results came back a week later. I opened the email in the same chair I'd sat in countless times before, paying bills, reading articles, planning Emily's future. But this was different. My heart pounded as I clicked the link, entering the password to access the report. The words were cold, clinical, but they cut like "Nivus paternity, excluded." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as the reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. Emily wasn't mine. I stared at the screen, hoping it would change, that some error message would pop up, some glitch in the system. But it didn't. The truth was right there, stark and undeniable. Mine, and that meant one thing. Melissa. I closed the laptop and sat in silence for what felt like hours. Memories flooded my mind. Emily's first steps. Her first day of school, the late nights comforting her after a nightmare. None of that had changed. She was still my daughter in every way that mattered. But Melissa had stolen something from me. She'd stolen my trust, my faith, my entire foundation. She'd lied to me for over a decade. Let me sacrifice everything for a child that wasn't even mine. And Brandon, the way he had joked, the way he'd spoken at that party. It wasn't just a coincidence. He had to know. My hands curled into fists. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They thought I was too blind, too trusting to ever figure it out. They were wrong. That evening I was calm, too calm. Melissa noticed immediately when she walked in the door, her eyes scanning me like a radar. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone cautious. I smiled, standing at the stove, stirring the past I'd been pretending to focus on. "Perfect. How was work?" She hesitated, clearly thrown off. "Long. What's for dinner?" "Spaghetti. Emily's favorite." And Melissa sat at the table, her movements slow and deliberate. She was watching me now, sensing something was off. I turned off the burner and plated the food, setting it down in front of her with a flourish. "Enjoy," I said, taking my seat across from her. She twirled the pasta on her fork, but didn't take a bite. "You're being weird," she said finally. "Am I?" I leaned back in my chair, my smile never wavering. "I just figured we should enjoy a nice meal together. You know, like a family." And her fork clattered against the plate. "What's going on?" "Nothin'." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "How long?" Melissa froze. "What are you talking about?" "Don't do that," I said, my voice low and steady. "Don't play dumb. How long have you been lying to me?" Her face went pale, her eyes darting toward the door, like a trapped animal looking for an escape. "Lying about what?" she whispered. "About Emily." Her gasp was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. I'd been waiting for it. "You're insane," she said, standing up abruptly. "Am I?" I stood too, my voice rising, because the DNA test I ran says otherwise. "Emily isn't mine, Melissa, and you knew. You knew all along." Her chair toppled over as she backed away, her hands trembling. "Nothing." "Ike, don't you dare lie to me again." I slammed my fist on the table, the plates rattling violently. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. She wasn't the victim here. I was, Emily was. You've been lying to me for years, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You let me believe she was mine. You let me sacrifice everything for her while you stood there and laughed behind my back. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in our entire marriage, she had nothing to say, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. Melissa stood there, frozen. The color drained from her face as if my words had slapped her. For a moment, I thought she might confess. But then her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes hardening. You are out of your mind, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. I don't know what you think you've found, but whatever it is, it's wrong. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that filled the room. Wrong. You think I didn't double-check. You think I didn't read every damn word of that report 100 times, hoping, praying that I was the one making a mistake. Nathan, stop, she pleaded, stepping toward me, but I raised a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't. Just don't. I want answers, Melissa. Real answers. Her eyes darted toward the staircase, where Emily was fast asleep. She lowered her voice, almost a whisper. We're not doing this here. Not now. Why not? I snapped. Afraid she'll hear the truth. Afraid she'll find out that her whole life has been one big, elaborate lie. Her composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's not like that, she whispered. Then tell me what it is like. My voice shook the walls, my frustration boiling over. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like you and Brandon have been laughing at me for the past 10 years. At the mention of Brandon's name, her face crumpled. That was it. The confirmation I didn't even realize I was waiting for. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? I pressed, my voice deadly calm now. Did you think I'd just keep working myself to the bone, saving every cent I had, while you played house with your perfect family? Nathan, please, she choked out, her hands shaking. No, I roared, slamming my hands on the table. You don't get to please me, Melissa. Not anymore. You stole 10 years from me. 10 years of my life, of my love, of my trust. You don't get to cry your way out of this. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the chair behind her, covering her face with her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, her voice muffled by her palms. I stood there, stunned for a moment. You didn't mean for it to happen, I echoed, incredulous. That's all you've got. That's your excuse. She looked up at me then, her face streaked with tears but her eyes suddenly blazing with anger. You don't understand, Nathan. You were never around. You were always working, always tired. I felt alone. The audacity of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was working to give you and Emily a better life. I was breaking my back so you wouldn't have to. And I didn't ask you to. She screamed back, her voice cracking. I never asked for the private school or the violin lessons or the damn college fund. You did that for yourself, Nathan, to feel like you were a good husband, a good father. But you weren't here. Brandon was. Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt the world shift beneath me, the last remnants of the life I thought I knew crumbling into dust. So that's it, I said, my voice eerily calm. You replaced me with him. While I was out working to support this family, you were building a new one with Brandon. She didn't deny it. She just sat there, silent, tears dripping onto her lap. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, I spoke, my voice cold and deliberate. I want him here. Tomorrow. You'll call him, and he'll come. And we're going to talk about this. Her head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. Nathan, no. Wes, I interrupted. You owe me that much. Both of you do. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked upstairs to Emily's room. I stood in the doorway, watching her sleep, her soft breath steady and peaceful. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Whatever happened next, Melissa and Brandon weren't walking away from this unscathed. The next morning, the house was unnervingly quiet. Melissa avoided me, her footsteps soft and tentative as she moved around, pretending to go about her day. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, my phone sitting in front of me like a loaded weapon. You called him yet? I asked without looking up. She froze in the doorway, clutching a dish towel like it was a lifeline. Nathan, please. Don't please me, Melissa, I said, my voice low but firm. You have until noon. If you don't call him, I will. And trust me, my version of that conversation will be much worse. Her face twisted with something between anger and despair, but she didn't argue. She disappeared into the bedroom, and minutes later, I heard her hushed voice through the door. When she emerged, she didn't look at me. He'll be here at 1. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood, poured out my now cold coffee, and left the house. I spent the next few hours driving aimlessly, the storm in my head too loud to think straight. How did I get here? How did I let my life become this? The answers didn't come, but by the time I pulled back into the driveway, I knew one thing for sure: I was done being the fool. At exactly 100 p.m., Brandon's shiny black car pulled up in front of the house. He stepped out wearing his usual polished smile, his white robe draped over his arm as if he'd come straight from the hospital. The sight of him made my blood boil. Melissa opened the door before he could knock, glancing nervously between us. "Let's just stay calm, okay?" she whispered, but I brushed past her, motioning for Brandon to follow me into the living room. He walked in confidently, his smile still firmly in place. "Nathan," he greeted, his tone dripping with fox warmth. "Melissa said you wanted to talk. What's going on?" I didn't sit. I stood over him as he settled onto the couch, Melissa hovering nearby. My voice was sharp and cold. "You know exactly what's going on." Brandon's smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "I'm not sure I understand." "Cut the crap," I snapped, my voice booming. "I know. About Emily. About you and Melissa. About the lies you've both been feeding me for over a decade." His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Melissa let out a small gasp, her hands flying to her mouth. "Is that what this is about?" Brandon finally said, his voice unnaturally calm. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other like we were discussing a bad business deal. "Nathan, I think you've misunderstood some things." "Don't," I said, cutting him off. "Don't gaslight me. Don't insult my intelligence. The DNA test doesn't lie." His face went pale, but he recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "I see. So you've been playing detective." "Someone had to," I shot back. "Because apparently, the two of you were too busy laughing behind my back to care about the truth." Melissa sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands, sobbing quietly. Brandon, however, didn't look remorseful. If anything, he looked annoyed. "This doesn't change anything," he said, his voice clipped. "Emily is still your daughter. Nathan, you've raised her. She loves you. What difference does biology make?" The audacity of his words was like gasoline on a fire. "What difference does it make?" I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. "It makes all the difference in the world when I've been lied to, manipulated, made to feel like a joke in my own damn family." Brandon stood, his calm demeanor slipping. "Look, I get that you're upset, but we didn't plan this. It happened. And Emily doesn't deserve to suffer because you're having some kind of ego crisis." I took a step closer, my fists clenched at my sides. "You don't get to talk about what Emily deserves. Not after what you've done." He didn't back down, his eyes locking onto mine. "What do you want, Nathan? An apology?" "Fine, I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry you found out. But it doesn't change anything." Melissa let out a strangled cry, but I ignored her. My focus was solely on Brandon now. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" I said, my voice dangerously low. "You think 'cause you're the golden boy, the respected doctor, you can do whatever the hell you want." Brandon smirked, and I saw red. "I think," he said slowly, "that you need to take a long, hard look at yourself and ask why Melissa turned to me in the first place." The room exploded. My fist connected with his jaw before I even realized I'd moved, the force sending him stumbling backward into the coffee table. Melissa screamed, rushing to his side. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control. Brandon wiped the blood from his lip, glaring up at me with a mixture of shock and fury. "You going to regret that?" he hissed. "No," I said, my voice steady, my breathing heavy. "You're the one who's going to regret this. Both of you are. I've sacrificed too much for this family to let you walk away without consequences. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in stunned silence. Upstairs, Emily's door was cracked open. I stepped inside, watching her as she worked on her art project, completely oblivious to the chaos downstairs. I knelt beside her, my heart breaking and hardening at the same time. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. For the next week, I moved like a ghost through the house. Melissa tried to talk to me, her voice trembling as she begged me to listen, to work this out for Emily's sake. Brandon even had the audacity to call, leaving a voicemail about how we could resolve this like adults. I ignored them both. Instead, I poured my energy into a plan. A quiet, calculated plan that would leave no room for mistakes. If they thought I was just going to fade away quietly, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The first step was gathering information. Brandon's social media presence was curated to perfection: smiling patients, awards, community events. But the cracks were there if you looked closely enough. Overlapping dates, inconsistencies in his stories, questionable associations. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Next, I reached out to a private investigator. I told him everything. About the affair, the DNA test, Brandon's public image. He listened quietly, taking notes. And when I finished, he nodded once. This guy sounds like a real piece of work. Don't worry, we'll dig up something solid. And they did. A month later, I had everything I needed. Documents, photos, and emails that painted Brandon as not just a liar and a cheat, but someone who had crossed ethical lines in his professional life, too. There were financial irregularities in his clinic's records, inappropriate relationships with staff, and even accusations from former patients that had mysteriously disappeared. It was all damning. But I didn't just want to destroy his career. I wanted to make sure everyone knew who he really was. The opportunity came at a charity gala Brandon was hosting. Melissa had been avoiding me more and more, so when she left that evening dressed in her finest, I knew where she was going. I waited an hour, then followed. The venue was packed with the city's elite, and Brandon was the star of the show, working the room with his practiced charm. Melissa was at his side, smiling as if she hadn't just blown up our family. I didn't make a scene right away. I waited, watching, biding my time until Brandon stepped onto the stage to give his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth and confident. Thank you all for being here tonight. Together we can continue to make a difference in our community. I stepped forward, my hands gripping the envelope that held every shred of evidence I'd gathered. And what kind of difference are you making, Brandon? I called out, my voice cutting through the applause. The room fell silent. Brandon froze, his smile faltering as he looked out into the crowd. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the panic bloom in his expression. "Nothin'," he said, his voice strained. "This isn't the time." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Let's talk about the kind of man you really are, the lies, the affairs, the patients you've exploited." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd as I stepped onto the stage, tossing the envelope onto the podium. Brandon reached for it, but I grabbed the microphone before he could. "This man," I said, addressing the room, "isn't the hero he pretends to be. He's a liar, a manipulator, and a disgrace to his profession." Brandon tried to interrupt, but the crowd was already buzzing with shock. Melissa stood frozen at the edge of the stage, her face pale as she realized what was happening. I turned to her, my voice steady but cold. "And you. You stood by him, knowing what he was doing. You lied to me, to our daughter, and let me waste 10 years of my life for your little charade." She tried to speak, but I didn't let her. "I'm done, Melissa. Done with him. And as for Emily," my voice broke slightly, but I forced myself to continue. "She deserves the truth, too, and I'll make sure she gets it." The crowd erupted into chaos, people whispering, cameras flashing, Brandon shouting as security approached. I left the stage without looking back, the sound of their lives crumbling behind me. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Brandon's career was in freefall as reporters uncovered more of his dirty secrets. Melissa tried calling, texting, even showing up at the house, but I didn't answer. The divorce papers were filed that same week. I signed away everything, the house, the custody arrangement. But I didn't care. I needed a clean break. For the first time in years, I felt free. And as for Brandon and Melissa, they could keep each other. They deserved every bit of the destruction they'd brought upon themselves. Melissa showed up at the house 2 days after the gala, looking like she hadn't slept. Her makeup was smeared, her hair unkempt, and her expression a mix of anger, desperation, and fear. She didn't bother knocking. She had her key, though not for much longer. "Nathan," she yelled, slamming the door behind her. "We need to talk." I was in the living room, calmly packing some of my things into a box. The divorce lawyer had been efficient, and soon the house wouldn't be my problem anymore. I didn't even look up as she stormed into the room. "Talk," I said, placing a book into the box. "Funny. I don't remember you being interested in talking when you were sneaking around with Brandon." But her face twisted in frustration. "Set was different, and you know it. What you did was cruel. Publicly humiliating him, me in front of everyone. You ruined his career." I finally turned to her, meeting her glare with a calm that seemed to unnerve her. "Good. That was the point. You didn't have to go that far," she shouted. "Do you even realize what you've done? He's lost everything, his job, his reputation. And I lost 10 years of my life," Melissa said, cutting her off, my voice sharp. 10 years believing I had a family that was mine. 10 years working myself to the bone for Emily, for you, for a future that wasn't real. So don't stand there and tell me I went too far. I barely even scratched the surface of what you two deserve." Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't move me. She wasn't crying out of remorse. She was crying because she'd finally lost control of the situation. "You didn't have to bring Emily into this," she said quietly. "She's innocent." "Innocent." I laughed bitterly. "She's the only innocent one in this mess. And don't you dare pretend you were thinking about her when you made the choices that brought us here." Melissa sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. She whispered, "A mistake." I repeated, my voice rising. "No, Melissa. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or spilling wine on the carpet. What he did was a betrayal. A calculated, deliberate betrayal. So don't insult me by calling it a mistake." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, no love. Just the cold, hard resolve that had been keeping me afloat since this nightmare began. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "I've already started the process." Her head shot up, her eyes wide. "Nathan, no. We can fix this. For Emily's sake." "For Emily's sake," I interrupted. "I'll do what's best for her. And staying in this sham of a marriage isn't it. She deserves the truth, and she deserves a parent who doesn't lie to her face every day." Melissa opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. "You'll get the house, the custody arrangement, everything you need to make sure Emily has a good life. But we're done, Melissa. There's no coming back from this." For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "Nathan, please." But I was already walking to the door, opening it wide. "You should go," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. She hesitated, as if hoping I might change my mind, but when I didn't, she finally stood and walked out. Brandon wasn't faring much better. The fallout from the gala had been swift and merciless. News outlets picked up the story, digging deeper into the evidence I'd provided. His former patients came forward, adding fuel to the fire, and within days, his medical license was suspended pending investigation. Melissa might have been willing to stand by him before, but the pressure became too much. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she distanced herself, claiming she didn't know the full extent of his actions. Classic Melissa, always playing the victim. As for Emily, the conversation I dreaded finally came. "Dad," she asked one evening, her voice hesitant, "why isn't Uncle Brandon coming around anymore? And why is Mom crying all the time?" I sat her down, doing my best to explain the situation in terms she could understand without burdening her with the full weight of the truth. I told her that adults sometimes make mistakes, that things don't always work out the way we hope. "But you'll still be my dad, right?" she asked, her eyes wide and fearful. The question broke me, but I kept my composure. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I'll always be your dad." But deep down, I knew things would never be the same. The day the divorce was finalized, I packed the last of my things and walked out of the house for the last time. I didn't look back. Melissa and Brandon had lost everything, but so had I. There were no winners in this story, only survivors, and I intended to survive. The weeks following the divorce were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and quiet nights in an empty apartment. The house, now Melissa's, was no longer my problem, and I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness every time I thought about it. Emily stayed with Melissa most of the time, though our visits were cordial enough. But I wasn't done, not yet. The damage to Brandon's career had been swift, but I wanted the fallout to linger. He was too used to bouncing back, too arrogant to stay down for long. I made it my mission to ensure that this time there would be no comeback. It started with a tip to a local journalist, a detailed, anonymous package outlining Brandon's financial discrepancies, the patient complaints, and the unethical behavior the private investigator had uncovered. The reporter was thorough, verifying every claim before running the story. When it broke, the fallout was immediate and widespread. Brandon's name became a lightning rod for scandal, his polished image shattered. The hospital cut ties with him, and his colleagues distanced themselves, many claiming they had suspicions, all along but lacked proof. I followed every headline, every update, with a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice. Melissa's life was unraveling, too, though she tried to hold it together. Emily mentioned in passing that they'd moved to a smaller house, that her mom seemed tired all the time. I didn't pry, but I knew Melissa was struggling to shield Emily from the chaos. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but every time I remembered her laughter at that party, her lies, her betrayal, the sympathy evaporated. The final act came unexpectedly. One evening, I received a call from Emily. She was upset, her voice shaky. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my stomach's tightening. "Did you and Mom get divorced because of Uncle Brandon?" The question hit me like a truck. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. "What do you ask that?" I finally managed. "Because I heard Mom talking on the phone," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "She said something about how you found out, and how everything's ruined because of Uncle Brandon. Is that true?" I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been dreading, but Emily deserved the truth. "Emily," I said carefully, "sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people around them. Your mom and I loved you very much, but some things happened that made it hard for us to stay together." "But it's Uncle Brandon's fault," she pressed. I hesitated. "Your mom and Uncle Brandon made choices that were wrong. Choices that hurt me. But none of that is your fault, okay? I will always be here for you, no matter what." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she whispered, "Okay?" The call stayed with me for days. Emily's innocence, her confusion, it broke something in me. I realized then that as much as I wanted to sever ties completely, I couldn't do that to her. She needed a father, and no matter how much I resented Melissa and Brandon, I wouldn't let their betrayal define my relationship with her. Months later, I stood in the courtroom as the judge finalized the custody arrangement. I agreed to shared custody, knowing it was the best way to keep Emily's life stable. Melissa avoided my gaze, her once confident demeanor reduced to quiet resignation. As we left the courthouse, she caught up to me in the parking lot. "Nathan," she began, her voice tentative. "I didn't stop walking, please," she said, desperation creeping into her tone. "Can we just talk?" I turned to her, my expression blank. "What is there to talk about, Melissa? We've said everything that needs to be said." She flinched but pressed on. "I just want to say I'm sorry for everything." I studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she didn't. It didn't matter anymore. "I hope you figure out your life, Melissa," I said simply, "for Emily's sake." And then I walked away, leaving her standing there, alone. Brandon never recovered. His name became synonymous with scandal, his career reduced to ashes. I didn't keep tabs on him, but every so often, I'd hear snippets through mutual connections. Last I heard, he'd left town, unable to rebuild in the shadow of his disgrace. As for me, I focused on moving forward. It wasn't easy, but day by day, I found pieces of myself I thought I'd lost forever. Emily became my anchor, the reason I kept going. She deserved better than the mess Melissa and Brandon had created, and I was determined to give her that. In the end, the truth had cost me everything, but it had also set me free. Months had passed, but the fallout of my actions continued to ripple through the lives of everyone involved. My focus remained on Emily, shielding her from as much of the chaos as I could. But even as I moved forward, the damage Melissa and Brandon had done lingered like a shadow. Then, one day, the phone call came. I was at work, stocking shelves in the back room of the hardware store, when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't familiar, but I answered anyway. "Is this Nathan?" The voice on the other end was sharp, authoritative. "Who's this?" "This is Dr. Carla Everett, Chief Administrator at deceit. Mary's Hospital. I'm reaching out regarding some recent allegations against Brandon Sullivan, and your name has come up in the investigation." My breath caught. "What kind of allegations?" "We've been reviewing his professional conduct, particularly in light of the information that became public after the charity gala," she said. Her tone softened slightly. "I understand you had a role in exposing some of these issues." I hesitated. "I didn't do it for the hospital. I did it because he destroyed my family." "I understand," she replied. "But I thought you might want to know. There's been a formal complaint lodged against him by a former patient. It's serious. We're looking at the possibility of permanent license revocation." A part of me felt vindicated, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What do you need from me?" "Any additional information you have about his behavior, particularly anything that could support the patient's claims. You've already provided a lot, but anything else could help us close this case." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the files the investigator had sent months ago. I hadn't looked at them since the gala. Reliving the betrayal, the lies, it felt like reopening a wound that had barely started to heal. But now it felt different. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. The next morning, I sent everything I had to Dr. Everett: emails, documents, testimonies from former staff members Brandon had wronged. By the time I was done, I'd built a case so airtight there'd be no way for him to slither out of it. 2 weeks later, I got the news. Brandon's medical license had been revoked. The official statement cited gross misconduct and unethical practices, but the whispers in the community painted a darker picture. He was done. Melissa called that evening. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Congratulations," she said bitterly when I answered. "You got what you wanted." "What I wanted," I said evenly, "was a life without your lies. Brandon's downfall is just a bonus. Do you even care what this has done to Emily?" She snapped. "I care about Emily more than anything," I said, my voice cold. "Which is why I won't let her grow up thinking it's okay to let people like you and Brandon walk all over her." "You're so self-righteous," she hissed. "You think you're the hero in all this, but you're not. You've destroyed more lives than you've saved." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but at least I can sleep at night." In the months that followed, I began to rebuild. Emily and I found a rhythm, creating new routines that were ours alone. She didn't ask about Brandon anymore, and I didn't bring him up. Melissa remained distant, her pride preventing her from seeking any kind of reconciliation. One day, as Emily and I walked through the park, she slipped her hand into mine. "Dad," she asked. "Yeah, sweetheart." "You're not like Mom," she said simply. I stopped, kneeling so I could look her in the eyes. "What do you mean?" "You don't lie," she said, her gaze steady. "Even when it's hard, you always tell the truth." For the first time in months, the weight on my chest lifted slightly. "And I always will," I promised her. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from all of this, it was that the truth might destroy lives, but lies would rot them from the inside out. And I was done with rot. The courtroom had been suffocatingly quiet, the weight of finality pressing down like a stone. When the gavel fell, it was like a gunshot, announcing the official end of a decade-long lie. I walked out of that building a free man, but freedom had never felt so hollow. Outside, Melissa was waiting near the parking lot, Emily by her side. For a moment, I thought she might approach, but something in my posture, or maybe my silence, kept her rooted where she stood. Emily waved at me, her small hand hesitant. I waved back, managing a smile, then turned away, walking to my car without a second glance. This was my life now, quiet, solitary, and carved out of the wreckage. The weeks that followed were an exercise in endurance. Emily was my only anchor, her visits the only light in an otherwise dark stretch of days. Each time she stayed over, we carved out little rituals, making pancakes on Sunday mornings, reading stories before bed. It was a fragile rhythm, but it was ours. One evening, As we sat together painting birdhouses at the kitchen table, Emily asked me the kind of question only a child could. "Dad, are you mad at me?" The brush froze in my hand, a streak of green paint bleeding across the wood. "Why would you think that?" Her brow furrowed, her little hand still busy with her own brush. "Because everything got bad after the party. And because you don't come to the house anymore." I put the brush down and leaned forward, looking her in the eyes. "Emily, none of this is your fault. Not one bit of it. Grown-ups make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes hurt other people. But I could never, ever be mad at you." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "You promise?" "I promise," I said, pulling her into a hug. That night, after I tucked her into bed, I sat alone on the couch, staring at the stack of papers the divorce lawyer had sent me. They were finalized now, sitting neatly in a manila folder as if they weren't the rubble of my life. I thought about Melissa, about the person I had thought she was and the reality I had been forced to confront. For so long, I had been consumed by anger and betrayal, letting it guide my every move. But sitting there, with the house silent and the papers signed, I realized I was tired of carrying it. Melissa didn't deserve forgiveness. Brandon didn't deserve redemption. But I deserved peace. The final act came unexpectedly. Weeks later, I received a call from Frank, an old friend who'd been by my side through this mess. He invited me to join him for a beer at his place, a quiet evening to catch up. As we sat on his porch, the sun dipping low behind the trees, he gave me the advice I hadn't known I needed. "Neat, you've been through hell. No one's going to blame you for being angry, but you've got to let it go eventually. Not for them, for you. Otherwise they win twice." His words stuck with me. The next day, I started to make changes. I threw myself into rebuilding the life I wanted, picking up woodworking again, spending more time outdoors, even joining a local group for single fathers. Slowly, the weight began to lift. But it wasn't until Melissa and I ran into each other by chance months later that I felt the shift fully settle. I was at a small coffee shop, sipping my usual black coffee when she walked in. She spotted me immediately and froze. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, but then she straightened and approached my table. "Hi, Nathan," she said softly. "Melissa," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Can I sit?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I gestured to the chair across from me. She sat, her hands nervously fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said after a long pause. "For what?" "For letting Emily keep both of us," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You didn't have to, but you did." I studied her face, looking for traces of the woman I had loved, the woman who had shattered me. She looked older, more tired, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar pang of anger when I saw her. "She's the only thing that matters," I said simply. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I know I can't fix what I did, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I hope someday you can move on, really move on." I leaned back in my chair considering her words. "I already have," I said. Her lips parted in surprise. But she didn't respond. She nodded, stood, and walked away. That evening, as I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, I thought about everything I'd learned over the past year. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what you do with it. Betrayal had broken me, but had also rebuilt me into someone stronger. For years, I had measured my worth by what I gave to others. My sacrifices, my work, my love. But now, for the first time, I was learning to give something back to myself: freedom. As the sun set, casting the sky in hues of orange and gold, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free, and that was enough.